If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People, what is the scariest, most spine-chilling ghost encounter or haunted horror experience you've had that's true?
When I was 5, whenever my family would stay at my grandmother's house, it would happen. She lives in a very isolated area in the mountains. I have 2 older brothers, and my grandma only had 1 spare bed and a couch, so when we stayed there, I would have to sleep in the bed with my mother and father, while my brothers slept on the couch. In the early morning hours, just before the sunrise, I got cold shivers and started to have this heavy feeling that somehow I was in danger. This large horse-shaped thing started coming through the shut glass doors that lead outside. It looked like a horse that was covered by a white bed sheet. It was very large and almost seemed to be as tall as the ceiling. It didn't have any distinct features, just the shape of a horse. The sliding door was located on the side of the bed and 3 feet from the end of the bed. As this thing slowly entered the room, the head of it turned towards me, and I quickly pulled the blanket over my head. I could feel it moving towards me. There was no sound, but I could feel it moving towards me. My whole body was in shock, and I couldn't move, I just felt fear. As those feelings went away, I pulled the blanket down, and it was gone. This would happen like clockwork whenever I would stay at my grandma's. We would spend around 5 or 6 days a year over there, and every single time it would occur. My family ended up moving when I was 8 to a different state, and we didn't visit my grandma until I was 14, and by that time she had people renting her downstairs, and I was never able to see if it would still occur. I lived in a rental that had a ghostly presence. It's an odd feeling that you can't shake, like you're always sharing the space with something else. We were driven out of the main big bedroom and slept in the smallest room, where we felt the safest. My housemate would hear noises and voices when we're not home, and she would think that we've arrived home only to discover nobody is there. The last night of us cleaning and vacating the premises, I felt like I was being watched very closely, as if she was over my shoulder / breathing down my neck while I was cleaning the bathroom next to the main room. We named her Martha. My wife and I used to live in a small rental farmhouse that was a converted log cabin from the mid-1800s. According to the farmer we rented it from, his family had lived there since they settled in the area, and it was the place most of them had lived and died in. He warned us we would likely have some experiences. Most of them were standard ghost encounter stuff, unexplained noises, cabinets and doors opening or closing, and shadows moving in the halls. None of the experiences seemed malicious, it was more like they wanted us to know it was their house too. But the one that was pretty out of the norm, to me, at least, happened soon after we had our oldest daughter. We had left some of her toys out on our coffee table, and while I was doing dishes in the kitchen after my wife and daughter had gone to bed, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye by her toys, and when I looked over, one of the toys, a little wooden car, was rolling back and forth. Not rolling off the table, but back and forth like a child was playing with it. This continued for maybe 10 seconds, and then it stopped. From then on, I assumed there was a child entity in the house. So going forward I always made sure to leave a couple of toys out for this child to play with. Never saw them actively moving again, but sometimes the toy would be in a different spot or have moved from the coffee table to the floor. Woke up close to 3:30 a.m. to find the bathroom, hallway, and kitchen lights on in our Salem, Massachusetts Airbnb. I found that odd. I then heard both of my friends giggling. No words. Just giggles. I considered getting out of bed to see what they were up to, but nah. They were having a good time at whatever they were doing. They got this, I said. I remember saying these words out loud. Went back to sleep. Woke up around 7:30 or so, and one of the 2 girls walked into my room to grab something. She asked, "Did you hear anything last night?" I excitedly said, "Yes," and proceeded to ramble off about what I saw and heard. With a slight drop of her lower lip, her face changed to shock. That's not what happened. The one sleeping in the bedroom dreamt of a woman pulling her leg, trying to remove her from the bed. The other was awakened from the couch in the living room. She heard moans and entered the bedroom to see what was the matter. Long story short, we suspect the wife and original owner of the home wanted nothing to do with us in her house. She was capable of manipulating my reality to mask the true nature of trouble occurring in the other bedroom. The woman did not want me to apprehend. I never believed spirits could manipulate what we can see and hear. Now I am a believer. So, I had one of those things as a kid where you put a net above your bed, and when you look up, you see stars. The first, and only, time I did that, I awoke very late at night. It was pitch black, but somehow I still saw a silhouette sitting on the edge of my bed. What scares me the most is that it looked identical to my grandmother. A little background: before she moved back to her original house, My grandma lived in Tennessee. When this occurred, she was staying at our house for a couple of days. I called my grandma, she had left to go back to Tennessee, in the morning and asked if she had been in my room late at night. And she said that she had left shortly after I went to bed and never came in my room. I don't know whether I dreamed it or whatever, but I never used that net thing again. And that silhouette never came back. Or at least, I never saw it again. I used to live in a house that was supposedly built on a burial ground. Before I was even born, my parents would see sensor toys or button-type toys flicker on and start making noise, even when no one was there. Anyways, as a kid I had a lot of nightmares, and I mean a lot. I don't have as many nightmares now that I've moved. There were also times when I would wake up to banging on the wall. I vividly remember asking my dad why he banged on the wall so often, to which he said he never has. However, I think the scariest stories come from the house I live in right now. There have been many times when I would be home alone and feel as if someone was watching me or that I wasn't alone. I've also had some strange, more in-depth nightmares. Not too long ago I had a nightmare where I got murdered by someone. I remember waking up screaming and shaking. I also had nightmares where I would get kidnapped, where I would go insane and kill someone, or nightmares about being chased with no escape. This one time I woke up from my sleep, and I crap you not, I saw a weird shadow thingy with horns run from one side of the room to the other. I freaked out and hid under my covers. Not too long ago, as I was falling asleep, I felt a light presence on my back, almost as if someone was softly dragging their fingers down my back. It was very strange. Unexplainable encounter that I've thought about for 20 years. For the record, I've never really told anyone this story. I come from the kind of family that would laugh in my face if I ever tried to explain what happened, so I kept it to myself for a long time. I was 9 or 10 years old, watching a movie with my dad and younger sister before bed, as we did almost every Friday night. Every night around the same time, Dad would send us to bed. We'd put on our pajamas, hop into bed, and wait for him to come up and say goodnight. He'd come upstairs, turn off our lights, and tuck us in. Sometimes it'd take 2 minutes, and sometimes I'd fall asleep with the light on before he came upstairs. I got into bed facing the wall and threw the covers up over my head like little kids do. Everything covered up but my face. As I was lying there looking at the wall, a human-shaped shadow slowly walked into the room. From my perspective, it was a clear outline of a human from about the belt line up. I distinctly saw the outline of an ear, and the silhouette moved with similar subtle shifting and bobbing that people have when they walk. It stood over me, not completely still, for 15 to 20 seconds and walked out of the room just as it came in. I wasn't horrified as much as I was confused. After it left, I waited a few minutes before I got up to go get my dad. He was downstairs, in his chair, finishing a bag of chips. I tried to ask him if he was in my room because I saw something, and it was so preposterous to him that he brushed me off and told me to go back upstairs. For Dad to walk up 3 flights of stairs and into my room, completely silently in an old house, and then walk back down the same way would have been impossible. I was wide awake the whole time. I've been thinking about that night for 20 years, and to this day I don't know what happened or why the shadow was there. Maybe you guys have experienced something similar and can provide some insight. House hunting ghost. During our first home search, we looked at a lot of homes. We thought we wanted a particular style of home. We focused on those types of homes. Our realtor found one in the northern suburb in our town. The day arrived for the showing. The realtor opened the door, the house was empty, a few pieces of furniture remained. We did the standard tour, following her from room to room. The master bedroom was on the first floor. It had Berber carpet that was snagged/messed up. My husband and the realtor went back down the hall to the great room. As I continued to look at the carpet, I was bent down looking at the carpet. I saw the realtor go past the doorway and through the door to the basement. I stood up to follow her down the stairs. The lady had short black hair, a tan coat, and gold earrings. Just as I was starting to go down to the basement, I realized that my husband and the realtor were upstairs. During this moment, I took my eyes off the lady and stopped. I did not proceed down the stairs. When I looked down the stairs, the lady had turned the corner. The realtor and my husband come down the stairs saying the basement was next. The realtor went down the stairs, I followed, looking at the realtor. Her hair was different, and her coat was not the same, and she had no earrings. The basement was empty. All the lights were on, and no one was down there. I was spooked. That had to be a prior owner. I faked a headache and called off the next showing. When we left the house, I saw the lady looking out the window at us. I told my husband what happened. He said the realtor told him the owner had passed away. I knew the lady had died in that home. My tribes, I am Dine in Mississippi Choctaw, Believe you cannot live in a home where someone died. The ghost was not malevolent, but I feel she was letting me know she was present. This is my dad's. One time my dad, my mom, and my dad's brother were on a freeway around the Dallas area. My mom was in the passenger seat, my dad was in the driver's seat, and my uncle was in the back. They were just driving, talking, and having a normal car ride. When they were driving, on the side of the road there was a sidewalk, and they just saw a man walking on it but coming in the direction they were driving in. He looked creepy, so my dad was kind of just staring at him. He glanced away for a moment to speak to my mom, and when he looked back at the road, the man was standing directly in front of the car. My dad swerved and hit the side of the freeway and looked back to see if the man was okay. The man wasn't there, and my dad looked around and saw the man peacefully walking down the sidewalk like he was earlier. In the early 2000s when I was in college, the small university in the South I went to had many stories of ghost sightings around campus, and many believed it was likely due to one of the buildings housing a makeshift hospital during the Civil War. The sighting that always gets me comes from a friend who was asleep in her dorm and suddenly woke up and saw someone sitting on the edge of her bed in all white. She initially thinks the figure is her roommate, but as she looks around the room, she sees that the other two roommates are asleep in their beds. She then looks back at the end of her bed, focuses on the figure, and realizes that what she is seeing cannot be explained. She believes it is a ghost. She freaks out, pulls the covers over her head, and lies there running wild with what she just saw. When she pulls the covers back, the figure is gone. Fast forward 15 years. One of the roommates of the girl and I are now working together as coaches at another university in the South. We have a player who transferred to us from the university where this happened. We are on a bus traveling to the university we all went to for a game. We ask the transfer player if she ever had any encounters with ghosts there. She tells a story about her waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a figure sitting on the end of her bed. Realizing it isn't any of her roommates, after scanning the room, she says to the figure, "What are you doing?" And the figure doesn't engage. Then she realizes it's not a person but likely a ghost. She pulls the covers up and hides. When she looks again, the figure has disappeared. I look at my colleague, who is staring in disbelief at the girl as she tells the story. She asks the transfer what room she lived in, and the transfer responds with 315, to which my colleague says, "No freaking way. That is the room I lived in, and my roommate had the same experience." These two instances were too far apart in time, and neither person knew of the other. I worked in a 117-year-old building and lived in a cellar apt. The cellar was a labyrinth of doorways and rooms. I loved it truly and appreciated it. You could see how it was once designed. At one end you could make out where there had been an office with a potbelly stove, a fireplace, the doorways, and a long-gone bathroom. I had 3 feral cats that adopted me. We explored it thoroughly with daily walks together. If there was anything inside, such as a bat from the old chimney, a rat, or another cat, my cats would lead me directly to it. One night, we locked it up, did our patrol, and I went back with them into my apt. Shut the lights out there, locked my door, and settled in. The cats settled in, and I was on my computer, reading the news, volume off. Had to always listen there. No booze or drugs, just another night. I heard a man and a woman talking outside my door, farther away, getting closer until they were just outside my door. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was overly polite in their tones of voice and seemed not nowadays. I thought I was hearing things. I looked at my cats, all 3 had their ears up and were looking at the door. They heard it too. Oh boy, I can't have this. I went right to the door and opened it. "You can't be here." The cellar was dark and silent. I hit the lights, went out, and looked around. No one was there. My cats didn't move, they had no interest, weren't listening anymore, and there was nothing there. I was kind of uncertain, went back in, went to bed and heard nothing further. The next morning I got up, unlocked the door, and there was one lady's boot outside it. The boot was a 1900s lace-up ankle type made of old, cracked, faded, and weathered leather. Everything around it was locked up and silent. Cats wanted out, paid no attention to the boot, and never found another one. I put it to the side, nothing else ever happened with it. Had other things happen there too. They were never threatening, almost appreciative that I was paying attention and cared about the place. I was happy there. About 15 years ago I was spending a lot of time at my grandma's apartment, helping her cook/clean and just keeping her company. Her neighbor a few doors down was an old man, who was unfortunately dying of cancer. I saw him in passing a couple times, and he came to the door once asking for something. After he passed away, I had the opportunity to move into his apartment. I jumped on it so I could be close to my grandmother. About a week after moving in, I was getting into bed and turned off the lights. At the foot of my bed was the old man. I froze. He looked so real and was making direct eye contact with me. I knew immediately that I was looking at a ghost and didn't know what to do. I wasn't afraid of him, so I just lay down and pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut until I fell asleep. I've had many other paranormal experiences, but that was the only time I've seen a full-bodied apparition. Ghost encounter? So, firstly, hello. I am in Germany at a concentration camp in Buchenwald right now. If you don't know what that is, well, it's a camp where people got forced to work if they got caught planning something against Hitler. There were many people there. So I went into a horse stable, also called the Stable of Death. Over 8,000 people got ended there. When I set foot in it, it felt like people started clinging onto me. I heard so many voices whispering something, the only word I could understand out of them was help. I don't know if it also has something to do with that, but my kneecap felt like someone was pushing something under it. When I went out of the ruins, it all stopped. To check if it was just imagination or real, I went in again, and the same thing happened. I am a bit away from it now, the pain in my knee is still there. Oh, what I forgot to mention is that I am here to visit my great-grandfather. What is different at Buchenwald from other concentration camps is that they didn't have a gas chamber. So, something did happen. While I was walking through the graves, I suddenly felt a cold hug, hearing someone saying, "Thank you," and then I couldn't breathe for a bit. When I asked my mom, she is with me here, I found out that my great-grandfather died of a lung infection after needing to stand in cold water in winter for 1 or 2 days. Do you think it could be that he hugged me? Here's a funny/terrifying encounter I had. So 8 years ago, a neighbor, about 5 houses up from me, had died. He was a pretty well-off guy, but according to what was being said in the neighborhood, he had slipped in his kitchen, fallen, hit his head, and died. The whole thing was fishy. Now one day, I need to go to the supermarket. Where I live, the community is split into 2, separated by this dense patch of forest. The forest is behind my house, so it is often used as a shortcut. The normal route from my house to the supermarket on the main road that would connect the 2 halves would be about a mile. The shortcut would make that difference about 150 meters. So I'm leaving the house to go to the supermarket, and I'm eating a cinnamon roll, walking through these woods in the dead of night with my flashlight. I get distracted by something, trip, and fall to the ground. Kinda pissed, I look around to see if anyone saw that. Then something catches my eye. A pair of slippers. I look up, and I'm looking directly at my neighbor, who just died a few days ago. I started choking on the cinnamon roll immediately. I nearly shat and pissed myself at the same time. The only thing I could do was start, wave, and walk away, wondering what the heck just happened. Got home and told my mom what happened, and she nearly pissed herself laughing and crying while I was there confused. Turns out the guy had a twin brother. Facepalm. Yup, nothing scarier than running into the twin brother of a dead guy in the middle of the woods at 8 at night. Well, this happened yesterday, so this is a good time. I work in a long-term care facility that primarily houses ventilated and comatose patients, so most individuals are not awake, particularly in the area where I was working. Anyway, I was the only therapist there that night, and I had 2 nurses in the ward with me. We kept hearing a child crying, so I thought one of the patients was wheezing and needed some chest physio, so I went to check on all the rooms, nothing, but every time I went back to my station, I heard cries. That went on for the whole night. When I asked the nurses, they said it happened a lot in that ward. I hope I never go back there again. My parents live in a small and very old town in northern Lithuania. The old part of the town was basically built on a cemetery. From time to time, there are archaeological finds like the corpses of Swedish knights buried with their armor or around 1,000-year-old semi-Gallian, an ancient Baltic tribe who fought against German crusaders, graves. There are rumors that under the central square's pavement, there is a mass grave of Napoleonic soldiers who died while returning from Russia. Also, there is a mass grave of plague victims from the Middle Ages. That place is called by locals the Old Grave. Taking this into consideration, it is not very odd that there are various creepy stories that I have heard while living in that town. However, I would like to share the ones I heard from my relatives and experienced myself. My father used to tell us children a story that when he was a youngster while living in his parents' house, same town, he experienced paranormal activities. For example, once he was alone at home in the kitchen, and out of nowhere, a potato was thrown by somebody invisible from the potato box into the middle of the kitchen. Also, my father says that somebody communicated with him. He used to knock on the wall in his room, and somebody would always knock back, even if the house was empty. Even my mother confirmed this, as she witnessed the knocking on the wall. She said that she was skeptical about this and thought that my father was trying to pull a prank on her, but to this date, she has no proof that it was a prank. Talking about my brother, he once told me that he was sleeping in his own room at my parents' house. He woke up at night, and the room was lit by the moonlight. He saw a man sitting on his chair, who was sharply dressed. The man was sitting facing the window, and it seemed like he was thinking about something. My brother's first thought was that it was sleep paralysis, which he had experienced a few times in his lifetime, and he even found a way to cope during those episodes. You have to try to move your fingers, as generally your body is paralyzed. However, this time, the scary part was that my brother could move his body easily, and when he started moving, he sat in his bed. The man turned to him and stared for a few seconds, then just vanished. And lastly, I would like to share my experiences. When I return to visit my parents, from time to time I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like somebody was just shaking my shoulders. I always thought that it was just some kind of neurological thing, but one night when I was getting to sleep, I was getting there but still could feel what was happening around me. It happened again. However, that time I felt like somebody started touching my shoulders and then shook them. I jumped from my bed, but there was nobody there. A story my father told me, from his own experience. Back in the 1970s he worked on various marine engineering projects on the Forth and was on this old tugboat. It had been built in Germany in the late 30s and came adorned with regalia from that period. Anyway, one night they were moored offshore, and the other guy asked to go ashore. So my dad's just sat in the wheelhouse, drinking coffee and reading the paper. Through the door he hears this vague noise. Like someone's on board. The other guy hasn't come back, as the launch isn't there. The radio is turned down. So he keeps listening. It's like someone half singing under their breath, like when you're working on something. He follows the sound, and it's coming from the hatch to the engine room. Listening hard, Dad said he caught German, and being a pretty proficient speaker, he could make out it was an old wartime song about a fallen comrade. At this point my dad said he considered going down, but then figured maybe he would rather there be two people on board. So he got back to the wheelhouse, shut the door, and watched for his mate coming back. As soon as the guy was on board, he asked about the singing. The other guy knew all about it. It seemed the boat had been strafed in the ear and the crew all ended. The boat had been captured and renamed. The story was that the ship's engineer didn't want to leave. Still had work to do in the engine room. When I was about 9, I had this problem where as soon as everyone else in my house was asleep, I would start hearing a mild high from down the hall. The first night I followed it, and every time I went to its origin, it got a bit farther. I got to the stairs before I ran back to my room. It happened every night for, 2 years. By the third month, the situation started to get significantly worse. I would hear something running up and down the stairs with a very loud high from right outside my door. By the end of the first year there were bangings, and the highs turned into my name. It would just be a very intense Josh every few seconds. The worst it got was right at the end of the second year, when it ended. By this point it felt like something was screaming my name inside my room. There was running on the stairs and banging on the walls, and sometimes my closet door would give a little shake. The worst part about all of this was none of my family ever heard a thing. I felt like I was going completely insane, and I was 11 by this point. It's been 5 years since last night, and I still don't know what it could have been. I still live in the same town, and just looking at the house makes me shiver. As a child, I saw a black figure outside my window. When I was younger, I slept by a window, and I still do now. It was an average night. I'm settling in for bed, getting comfy, and looking out of my window. At that moment, I see a tall black figure. It has the features of a man, and it is tall, like very tall, at least 8 feet. I stare at it with amusement at first, but it dawns on me. It's on a roof staring at me, and that's when it sets in, hook, line, and sinker, it's really staring at me. I feel tears building up, and the man becomes a black blur, and now I'm bawling my eyes out trying to be as quiet as possible. I now can't keep quiet anymore, and I call for my parents, screaming bloody murder, yelling, "There's someone on the neighbor's roof," or something along those lines. They come rushing down the stairs to investigate my screaming, and they look out the window. My dad stood there for a few seconds just looking out the window, closed the curtains, and just peeked out the window while my mother soothed me. After a few years, I brought this up, and my dad told me that he had seen the man before, but never on a roof. He was always just staring and not moving. Shadow people and other odd characters. So I currently live in the same house I grew up in. It's a little house in a shabby, low-income suburban area. My parents recently moved, but they let me stay here for a modest rent. I've lived here for over 20 years. My parents bought the place from an older couple, and as far as we know, there haven't been any deaths or other tragedies here. Everything I'm about to describe happened when I was between 4 and 7 years old. After that, all the weirdness just kind of stopped. I don't know what to make of that. I had a pretty vivid imagination, but not that vivid. My imagination was vivid, but not to the extent of hallucinations. In any case, it all looked and felt very real. I'll let you decide for yourselves. First, the shadow people. There were multiple figures. I saw as many as 3 or 4 together once. They moved along the walls and bent around lights and corners, just like a regular shadow, but with no people around to cast them. I even wondered if it was being caused by people walking by outside, but it would happen in rooms where no windows faced the street and when it was dark outside. Even though I was a weird kid who loved ghost stories and ghost hunters, I was petrified of them. I basically sat still and tried not to catch their attention. I only remember one confrontation. I was home alone one afternoon, latchkey kid. I went into my parents' bedroom for some reason, and there was a shadow standing by the bed. The bed was pushed into the corner, so it was in the space between the edge of the mattress and the wall. I stood there staring. Then it raised its hands to its head, like that painting the screamer or whatever it's called. I know it wasn't my shadow, because I was too scared to move a muscle. It was like it was just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. I screamed and ran out of the house, cowering in the backyard until my parents returned. There were 2 other entities, and I only saw them once apiece. These weren't shadows. They both looked like real, 3-dimensional people. Entity 1, I was playing on the living room floor, with my back to the couch. Eventually I turned around, and there was a woman in a shiny black catsuit stretched out on the couch. She had long hair, but I don't remember what color. She smiled at me, kind of a smirk. I panicked because a stranger just appeared in my house out of goddamn nowhere. I ran outside to get my mom, crying that there was a lady on our couch. She didn't investigate, she just immediately brushed it off and sent me back inside. Good thing it wasn't an actual intruder. The lady was, of course, gone. Entity 2, I was in my bedroom and walked out into the living room. Only, it was different. The furniture didn't look like ours and was arranged differently. In the center of the room was a shabby recliner, maybe like a brown or green color. It was faced away from me, but I could see someone sitting in it. I slowly crept around the side of the chair to get a better look. The person was middle-aged, fat, and balding. Picture Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force. I can't remember if he noticed me or not, but he didn't react. I just backed away and left the house. When I came back inside, everything looked normal again. Whether real or imagined, these encounters terrified me as a kid, and I hope you guys get a decent shiver out of them now. Cheers. It was a dark and stormy night. I know, the usual creepy situation. But hear me out. I was having trouble sleeping for some reason and decided to leave my room for whatever reason. Now I don't know if it was already there or if it appeared after a flash of lightning, but either way, I remember it. Looking down from the top of my stairs, I saw a large wolf-like creature looking up at me. The creature seemed very realistic, except for its bright red eyes and its mouth with bright white, foaming teeth. My mind went blank, and on autopilot, I walked back to my bed, not daring to look out my door or window, put the sheets over my head, and slowly went to sleep. It didn't leave that big of an impact on me, but sometime later, I came across a diagram of a bunch of mythical creatures online, and what do you know? It was there. Apparently it's known as the black dog and has been part of British folklore or something like that for a while. It's known as a bad omen, which appears during thunderstorms, at crossroads, and, I think, at places where bad stuff has or will happen. Interesting stuff. Remembering that moment definitely helps whenever I start researching a topic that might be hard to believe, such as astral projection. It's like my only foothold into the paranormal. Which is nice. As a kid, my dad used to have us hitchhike from the Naas Road in Dublin down to Waterford. There was no real public bus network. On some occasions you'd get lucky and might get a lift all the way. Usually it was a combination of waiting on the side of the road and getting a lift. We would get left off somewhere and wait again. Anyway, you get the idea. This one time in the late 80s we must have hitched about 6 or 7 lifts. It took hours, and we arrived in the town of Lismore, near the castle. The driver left us off there, and it was after 11 p.m. in mid-November. It was so cold and dark, the roads were pitch black. Dad said it was around another 8 to 10 miles to reach our destination, my grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, we were standing outside the castle and started walking in the dark when we could hear footsteps behind us. We couldn't see anything and kept walking. After about 30 minutes, I became uneasy, and Dad also expressed concern because the footsteps, which were 7 or 8 feet away from us, sounded big and heavy. In the distance we could see a very faint street light. Dad started to walk a bit quicker now and said that when we get into the light, we will see who is following us. The light seemed miles away. The steps got closer as we got to the light. It was almost like they were trying to keep up, and at this point I was petrified. Dad was barely holding it together. For my sake he squeezed my hand tighter. Steps getting closer, he picked me up in his arms and made a dash to the street light. I'm holding onto him for dear life, and just as we step into the light, the footsteps stop dead. Standing there with me in his arms, the light had this strange copper glow, almost like an aura. You could now see the fog on this pitch-black country road. We stayed under that light for what felt like half an hour, frozen with fear, fearing if we left the light, the steps would start again. Trapped, we had no choice and had to keep going. We could see the town lights 3 or maybe 4 miles off, and as we started to keep walking, the big heavy steps started again. It's after 12 now. We are really worried, afraid to look back. In the distance we hear a faint engine noise. We keep walking. As the engine gets louder, we can see the headlights behind us, coming from the direction we had walked from, the two of us waving our hands, praying this vehicle will stop. The vehicle pulled up, thank God. The man asks where we are going. Next town, please, Dad says in a very shaken voice. We jump in, and the man in the car tells us, you must be mad walking this road. Sure, have you never heard of the ghost that walks the streets here? He's trying to find his way home, people often hear his steps. We said nothing in that last car trip into the town. The man left us off only a short 5-minute walk to the grandparents' house. Every few years I drive my dad down, passing by the castle and the long, dark, winding road we once walked that night. We look at each other and laugh, but that night there were no laughs. I've never seen my dad so scared. He's a hardy guy, doesn't scare easily, but he was shaken that night, as was I. My terrifying encounter with that being. So my house is actively associated with the paranormal. One reason being, our house was not was blessed improperly when first constructed. This incident occurred about 5 to 6 years ago, during my early adolescence. I entered the kitchen, and our kitchen doesn't have a ventilation system. It only has a small window, 90 centimeters in length, 30 centimeters in breadth, situated above our sink. As I washed my hands, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched by someone or something. I looked everywhere, right, left, back, down, and finally above, and what I saw left me ducking down on the ground. It was a being hovering over the small window, a black body with yellow spots throughout its abdomen. Yellow eyes glowing in the pitch-black darkness. I could dismiss it as a cat, but then it struck me. Which cat has such striking body features? And just as I questioned myself, it rapidly changed its body's posture and twisted its head left, right, left. I've had enough and left my kitchen in pure terror and fear. Note, after this, till this date, I've not encountered any neighbors, let alone cats or any animals with those body features. Also, furthermore, the place where it was observing me from has no support, from which an animal could sit and observe. Thank you for listening. This is my favorite because it's generational. 4 generations of my family have had this happen to them. My great-grandmother would tell a story about hanging out the wash one day and noticing who she assumed to be a neighbor walking across the field to the house. She waved to them and went inside to get more laundry, and when she came back, no one was there. She thought it was weird and shrugged it off. Later her husband, who had been working in a different but nearby field, told a similar story. He had seen someone walking across the field, turned around to do something, and when he looked back, the person was gone. They each assumed the person had gone to talk to the other. Granny assumed he'd gone to talk to Papa, while Papa assumed she had gone to talk to Granny. Years later, their daughter was on the porch talking to a boy, her future husband, my great-uncle, when they both saw someone walking down a nearby path. According to my great-aunt, they waved, and the person waved back, then my granny called them to come inside. When they glanced out to invite the person in, this was a very different time, the stranger was gone. My uncle used to live in the same field where the original family homestead had been. He would tell stories about coming home, seeing someone walking along the dirt road, and then by the time he got to that spot, no one was there. This happened several times while he lived there. And finally, my cousins and I saw people down in the field repeatedly. Usually, we would see someone walking along the fence line or the dirt road, but when we looked away and then back, that person would be gone. Always thought it was a fun story. No one knows who they could be or why they keep walking along that road. By comparing stories, we know it always happens in roughly the same spot. I used to spend the night at my now spouse's parents' house during weekends when she was still living with them to save money. I would sleep in her brother's old room, which many people had creepy stories about. It shared a bathroom with my spouse's bedroom. One night I woke up to use the restroom and had the strongest feeling that she had climbed into bed and was next to me. I could almost feel a weight next to me. I was confused, as she never did that when we were at her parents' house, but very carefully climbed out of bed on the opposite side and walked with my phone light to the bathroom. After I was done, I decided to crack the door to her bedroom to see if she was there. A shiver went down my spine when I saw her in her bed. I was too afraid to check the spot where I thought she was and climbed carefully back in and tried to fall back asleep. Okay, so this happened when I was in 9th grade. I am living in a big city, and I mostly use the subway to go wherever I want, because my mother can't afford a car. I remember that I was on my way to visit my boyfriend, and as usual, I used the subway. I only had to drive to the next station because it's not a very long way. I had to stay in the subway for about 12 minutes. I was already waiting at the subway station when I noticed a guy that was giving me a very creepy look. He was around my age and a little bit taller than me. His hair was blonde, and he had deep brown eyes. I exactly remember what he was wearing. Gray cargos, a black hoodie, and Nike shoes covered in dirt. When I looked back at him, he didn't do anything. He just stood there and didn't even break the eye contact. That was when I started thinking that something wasn't right. When I finally got into the subway, I noticed he followed me. He sat down only 2 or 3 seats next to me. He still kept looking at me. It got so awkward, I texted my boyfriend. "Babe, there is a guy, and he won't stop watching me. Things are getting creepy." Since it was very late, my boyfriend texted back that I'm just paranoid and I should calm down. Maybe he was right, I thought. When he finally looked away, I used the chance to change seats, because that was a little too weird for me. Finally, I was safe from his weird looks. When I reached the station, still in fear, my boyfriend picked me up, because I asked him to since I was very scared. We wanted to go upstairs and walk to his house when I noticed the boy standing in a corner of the station smiling at me, with his eyes wide open. I told my boyfriend, "There he is." I meant him. And pointed at him. When my boyfriend asked me, "Who? What do you mean?" I realized. The boy wasn't there anymore. How could he get up the stairs so fast? Was he just an imagination? I never saw him again. I am now out of school, already starting my campus life, and I'm still thinking about what happened back then. My boyfriend and I, who are still together by the way, decided to not talk about that again. I am studying architecture, and our teacher, who's somehow very spiritual, once told us about ghosts. Since then I have been thinking. Imagination or ghost? So this happened to me when I was 9 years old. I have a photographic memory, so I remember it very well. My family and I had just moved to a new house. I've had insomnia my whole life, so I asked my mom what she does to help her fall asleep. She said that she just throws the blanket over her head, so the next night I tried that, and it didn't work at all. About 10 minutes into me trying to sleep, I had a really weird feeling to take the blanket off of my head. Once I did so, I saw at the foot of my bed a bright, white girl about to touch my foot. Think of it as looking at the sun, but I could still see her facial features and body as clear as day. Needless to say, I freaked out and ran into my parents' room. A few days later my sister and I were trying to make a zombie movie in the middle of the day. So I was in the backyard, and the only 2 doors that connected to the house were one that went to the kitchen and the other that led to the basement. For the movie, my eldest sister locked the basement door, and the kitchen door was always locked, so I couldn't freely go inside. As I was waiting for my cue to bang on the basement door for the movie, I turned around and saw the same bright, paper white girl walking towards me. I freaked out once more and had to beg and yell for my sisters to open the door for me. Once they opened it, the girl disappeared, and I never saw that figure again. I've had other ghostly instances, but nothing to that extent. Scary but true. For around 3 to 4 years, I had an imaginary friend. She was around my age, too, and aged with me. When I was 5, my imaginary friend, who I called Annabeth, I knew nobody with this name, slowly showed up less and less, but every time she showed up, she looked paler, less clean, and ruder. Then, on the final day, she mentioned that her father had come to take her, and I never saw her again. The fact is, even after all this time, 14 years later, I continue to sense a presence. My friends are afraid to enter my room, and no one feels secure in my parents' or grandparents' house when I'm present. The main event happened around 1 month after she left. My older cousin, Jace, 6 years old, his friend, Pete, 7 years old, my younger cousin, Tom, 4 years old, and I were sleeping out at my grandparents'. This house was once 3 houses that my grandfather joined, so our room was quite far away from the other bedrooms. This room has 2 doors, one that leads to the dining room and the other that leads to a balcony, which is dead-bolted and glued shut. Next to that door is a little table with a lamp on it. That night, me being the second youngest, I slept between the 2 older boys, Jace and Pete, while the youngest, Tom, slept next to the wall. In the middle of the night, Pete woke up to the lamp on the table moving. He thought nothing of it. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up to a large hand pulling me off the bed and towards the door that leads to the balcony. The only thing was, it was open. I grabbed at Jace and Pete's feet to get them to help me. Neither of them woke up, but whatever it was knocked the now just balancing lamp off the edge, luckily waking them up, but I was already off the bed on the floor. As soon as they grabbed me, the pulling stopped. I have never slept in that room again, and Tom slept through all the screaming, the little turd. None of us remembered this until recently when catching up with Pete because he moved, not because of this. Nobody knew how the deadbolt was ripped off the wall or the glue was broken. My grandpa was bound to a wheelchair after his 3rd stroke. He was staying at my house one time. I was woken up in the middle of the night by talking in my bedroom. I was staying in my brother's room while my grandpa was at my home, and we were watching him. I hear footsteps to my room. I see a tall, deformed figure with no eyes, just hollow, empty yellow sockets, looking in on me and my brother. I pretend I didn't see it and act like I'm asleep. It steps off, and all the lights that were just on turn off. I go to my room and see that my grandpa is gone, as is his wheelchair. I freak out and run to my parents' bedroom across the house. I pass the kitchen and see the same yellow light that illuminated the hall to the bedroom from the fridge and a figure in my fridge. I panic and freeze with fear. The figure looks at me, and I realize it is my grandpa. Out of his wheelchair? He says to me, "Hey, my name, are you hungry?" I was getting a snack at night. My grandfather has always been a nice guy and always cared for me, so I said yes. I then realized that after his stroke he shouldn't be talking or standing up without his wheelchair. Still on edge, I ask him about the wheelchair. He says a friend took it from him. My parents walk in, checking on the commotion, and my dad nearly flips when he sees my grandpa. He asked the same questions but also quizzed him on the friend. His friend was a man who he was good friends with back when he was a mariachi who died in a car crash. His body was wrecked, and he didn't look the same. My dad's face drained of color, and we called the hospital. Apparently my grandpa, by some miracle, was fully healed, and they couldn't explain it apart from luck. Then my dad took me and my grandpa and my brother to sit outside. I didn't and still don't know what happened when they spoke, but my dad kept a close eye on my grandpa. He seemed normal and lived 6 more years. I was 11 when he died at 81. When he died, I had a nightmare about that same figure from that night. And now, there were 2 in that dream. I still have frequent dreams about this, but they seem to be getting better. Freaky shit. I grew up in a home where a man died. Nothing crazy, just natural causes, but weird things always happen at our house. Unplugged lamps would occasionally turn on and off, among other strange occurrences. We kind of got used to it. When I was 17, my older brother died suddenly. He was 20 but still lived at home. The house immediately felt different. The morning after he died, my mom walked into the kitchen and smelled sulfur. She paused and called out to my dad. As he was walking towards the kitchen, they both heard a deep, demonic voice say, "I need a drink of water." The next night I had a dream that I was getting ready for school as normal and was waiting outside for the bus when I finally checked my phone for the first time. I had a text from my brother. In my dream I knew he was gone, and I vividly remember the feeling of confusion and fear when I saw his name on my phone. The text had one word: health. That's the most realistic feeling dream I've ever had, and I've never forgotten it. I'm still uncertain about its meaning. In the following weeks, the overhead light in my brother's room would randomly turn on and off, and his clothes would constantly fall off of hangers in the closet. My dad always used to gripe about my brother kicking his shoes off in the middle of the living room. Every day, for weeks after my brother died, my dad's shoes would somehow end up in the middle of the floor every single morning, without fail. Maybe we were just in the trenches of grief, but it certainly didn't feel like it at the time, and I've had a couple of experiences since that make me wonder. I went on a small solo trip to Edinburgh for a few days. My parents went here years ago, and I heard about the paranormal stories from down in the vaults underneath the city. I decided to check them out. I did a tour around the city that would include taking a look underground. It wasn't necessarily a haunted/ghost tour. It was merely an informative tour. We wandered down the stairs, and I'm the last one walking behind the group. We step into the first vault, nothing serious, just some history stories. As the group wanders on, I hear a loud and clear voice of a woman next to me, almost like she's trying to scream, in a vault that I'm walking past. It's pitch black, and I can't see shit. I don't think anything of it and continue walking and catching up with the group. I thought maybe it's a person that's going to scare us for fun maybe. I arrive at the other vault where everyone is gathered around a stone circle. The moment I step inside, I feel heavy, just like this annoying heavy pressure on my chest. And as the guide starts his story, I can barely breathe, I feel like I'm suffocating, and I just want to leave. I start listening to the story that he has been telling us, and he tells us that there were witches down here practicing with an entity. But the witch is up and left after a week. Do you know why? Because of the unbearable suffocation, hard breathing, and pressure feeling on their chests as they were in that room. When I tell you that my heart sank after hearing that. Eventually we get out of that room, the feeling of suffocation disappearing the moment I get out, and go to the vault next to it, the one where I heard the voice. We go in, and he starts telling what happened here. The story goes that here lived many people, including 2 women, best friends, and a boyfriend of one of the 2. The boyfriend ended his girlfriend and blamed it on the best friend. She died screaming that it wasn't her. He then goes on to tell us that sometimes people can still hear a woman's voice talking or screaming coming from this direction. Well, I up and left immediately. This happened when I was around 5 years old. It was a week before Mother's Day when my older brother, who was about 6 or 7, and I started planning what we should do for our mom. We both woke up around 5 a.m. and went into our kitchen to make plans. Before we started, I heard some strange noises coming from the room over, so I went to check it out to make sure our mom didn't catch us. I saw nothing, and the noises stopped, so I assumed it was my cat and went back into the kitchen with my brother. We sat on the floor and talked for a few minutes, petting my cat, when the cat started to act a bit strange. The cat was making weird hissing and whining noises, but once again, I brushed it off. My brother stopped mid-sentence and stared behind me at the entrance to the kitchen. I quickly looked behind me and saw another person peering past the wall, watching us. It looked almost exactly like my mom, only it didn't seem human. My brother and I were terrified, and my cat was still hissing. After I looked, the person quickly disappeared after about 3 seconds. I got up, ran into the room, and saw nothing. After that, my brother and I went straight to bed. We told our mom about it, and she denied ever waking up and watching us. To this day, she maintains that it wasn't her. About a month later I was in bed with my 2 little sisters. We shared a room, and I slept on the top bunk bed. I was up late because I couldn't fall asleep. All of a sudden something at the end of my bed grabbed my feet and yanked me with the force of a full-grown man. I ended up at the edge of the bed and almost fell off. I didn't see anything in the room, and my sisters were asleep. I didn't sleep in that bed for a few nights. I tell this ghost story to whoever listens, but I was in 2nd grade. It's dead in the middle of the night, about 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. I wake up suddenly, my room is pitch black but dimly lit by the light from the alley coming through the window. I roll over and look up at my ceiling fan and see a black figure sitting on the blade of the fan looking down at me. The figure was sitting with its legs hanging off the edge of the fan's blade. I got up and ran so fast out of my room to my mom's room. The door to my mom's room was locked because she was at her friend's house, and she locks it to prevent my older brother, who is 9 years older than me, from going in and stealing her weed when she is not home. Anyways, from there I run out of the hallway, and the front door is straight ahead. For some reason, before running out the front door, I turn around. When I turned around, I saw a sight that I could never forget. Sitting on the couch was a black shadow figure with glowing green eyes staring at me. I was frozen and didn't know what to do, so I just kept staring at it. About 5 to 10 seconds pass, and it stands up and just walks out of the room towards my brother's room/kitchen, where the back door was. From there I open the front door and go out into the hallway. We lived in an apartment at the time. I didn't know what to do from there because I didn't grab the phone to call my mom, so I had to go back inside, SMH. So I walk back inside, of course, as cautiously as I can, and go toward where this figure walked because that's where my brother and the phone were. I tried to wake my brother up, but of course he didn't wake up, so I grabbed the phone, walked out the back door this time because that's the closest exit, and called my mom to get home. I waited outside until she arrived, and fortunately, she was only about 10 to 15 minutes away. The crazy thing is that this isn't the only story I have from this apartment, but this is the most vivid one. My ghost stories. I come from a long line of Spanish gypsies. The women in my family, all of us, have felt, seen, and lived through moments that are hard to explain. One when I was just 2 years old, my godmother was staying with us. I used to play on her bed all the time, and one afternoon I was there, bouncing and giggling, completely full of joy. She walked in and asked, "Why are you laughing so much?" Without thinking, I said, "Granddad's playing with me." She froze. Then she ran out and brought my mom back. They both stood in the doorway watching me as I kept bouncing and laughing. My godmother asked again who I was playing with, and I said, "Granddad. He's doing the funny thing with his teeth." My granddad had false teeth, and when my older cousins were little, he used to loosen them and clack them around in his mouth to make them laugh. But here's the thing, he passed away when my mom was only 3 months pregnant with me. I never met him. I'd never even heard about him. My mom never talked about him, not even once. The moment I said that, my mom just broke down. She scooped me up and hugged me tight, crying into my shoulder. I asked her what was wrong, and she whispered, "Nothing, baby. I'm just thrilled you're playing with your granddad." 2 years later, when I first started dating my now husband, I used to stay over at his family's house. Every time I walked past the garage, I'd see an old woman moving around inside. I didn't say anything at first, I didn't want to scare him off. But after a couple of months, I finally told him, "I think there's something in your garage." He gave me this look and said, "Yeah, sometimes I feel someone's back there. In the back left corner." I hesitated and said, "That's weird. I always feel it in the back right corner." He just stared at me and said, "That's actually where I always feel it. I was trying to test you." Then it all made sense to me. I told him, "I think it's your grandma. Do you want me to ask her something? Something only she would know?" So I did. And she answered. She told me she was watching over the family. That I'd be good for him. That she trusted me to take care of him. 3. There was a time in high school that truly scared me. I started hearing voices, not just 1 or 2, but what felt like dozens, maybe even 50, all speaking over each other in different languages, from different places. I couldn't shut it off. I felt like I was being pulled in 100 directions all at once. I finally told my mom after a few weeks of this happening, and we called in my Nana. The 3 of us did a full ritual, candles, prayers, everything. My Nana is deeply spiritual, strong, and wise. When it was done, she looked at me and said, "You're a vessel. They're not trying to hurt you. They just want your help." I had to be blessed, protected, shielded, and slowly, the voices faded. But for a while there, I really thought I was losing my mind. It wasn't until it all went quiet again that I realized I'd just been open. Too open. 4. Then there was the night I'll never forget. I was 11. We just moved back to New Zealand and were staying at my mum's friend's place. One night, I woke up and saw my Uncle Dennis standing over my mom while she slept. He leaned down, kissed her on the forehead, and said, "Everything's going to be all right." Then he turned and saw me awake. He walked over, crouched by my bed, gave me a big hug, and kissed my head. "I'll always be here to take care of you, Poppet," he said. He was the only person who ever called me that. And then he was gone. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen while Mum was making her coffee. I said, "Uncle Dennis passed away last night." She stared at me, then rushed to call my aunt. He died at 3:40 a.m. My aunt asked how we knew. My mom just said, "Tiana saw him say goodbye." I was about 7 years old. My mom always went to bed early and looked in my room beforehand to check if I was asleep. I liked to play at night. I always just pretended to be asleep and then took out my Game Boy. So my mom was in bed. My dad always watches TV late and goes to bed late. Before he does that, he always checks to make sure the front door is locked. It's an old wooden door that is warped and quite loud when it opens. So it's a very distinctive sound. I woke up when my dad checked the front door and locked it. After that, he came up the stairs and went to bed. Thereafter, I couldn't fall asleep and played Pokemon on Game Boy. After a while, I hear someone open the front door, even though it was locked, and stomp up the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that my parents were in bed. Was the door unlocked? I suspected it was a burglar. I was as quiet as a mouse and listened. And now something very strange was happening, which made no sense at all. The supposed burglar used the bathroom upstairs and left the house again through the front door. The next day I asked my parents if the front door was locked this morning. Yes. I asked if anyone had to go to the bathroom at night. No. I can't explain it to this day, and it makes zero sense. I was definitely not dreaming. Prior to my military days, I was a troubled teen and young adult. I have had many experiences with ghosts. When I was about 11, someone sat on my bed while I was in it. I felt the depression and movement. No one was there when I looked. I have had 2 or 3 sleep paralysis occurrences in my whole 37 years of life, and the scariest one was a demon draining the life from me. When I broke his bond, he ran into a portal to the left of my room and disappeared. When I was 18, I was smoking a cig, and I exhaled, and the smoke plumed around a perfect face staring maybe 6 inches from my face. When I say a perfect face, think of one of those marble statue faces you see in the museum. I also saw some massive dog-like thing walk through my room through the wall, and I ran out to the living room. My roommate was freaking out and asking what the hell that was. When I joined the military, my last command was on a ship. It is a secure room, no one can enter without a code. Someone in a white flannel shirt, a heavyset male, walked past me. I saw his reflection in some plexiglass. I got up and rushed to see who the F was in our space, but no one was there. That same room, on deployment, someone kept whistling in the adjacent room. I went to investigate, no one was there. I couldn't find a radio, which beeps when you use it, and I never heard a beep, because we all know people like to mess with people on deployment. I asked if anyone was in the radio room with me, and everyone said no. I told them someone was whistling in there. They just smiled and shrugged it off. I also have someone that walks around my house currently. I need to find my motion camera so I can see who's there. The White Lady, or how my skepticism was tested. I grew up on the island of Guam for the first 17 years of my life. My family moved from the Philippines, and Guam was home for the time I was there. Coming from the Philippines, I was exposed to all kinds of myths and legends. The country was exposed to Spanish and American colonialism for several hundred years, and with it came the respective myths and legends. Catholicism was brought along and amplified the local legends and myths and quickly took root in the culture of the Philippines. I'm going to go off on a tangent. Southeast Asian ghost stories are by far the most terrifying thing that has graced my imagination. Half man, half horse demons, witches that kidnap the young, vampires living among you, and ancestral spirits that wandered the jungles making sure you paid your respects. Guam was no different and was subject to the changes and mixtures brought along by colonialism. One such myth was the legend of the White Lady. You can find legends of a lady dressed in white around the globe. The stories are often based on a tragic accident such as suicide, miscarriage, and murder of a lover. The white flowing dress symbolizes the purity and innocence of the ghost despite her demeanor. The Guam legend goes along the lines of this. This legend dates back to the late 1600s. A dashing, romantic Spanish officer pursued and courted a beautiful daughter of a prominent Chamorro family. Proud and happy for their daughter, the parents gave her permission to marry the officer. After the couple came back from their honeymoon, they settled in the village of Mina. In the beginning, the couple was happy, but the Spaniard's attitude began to change. Soon, he began to expect his wife to wait on him. He became demanding and violent. There was a river not far from their home, and the water was fresh, pure, and sweet. He ordered his wife to fetch him water from this river every day. Finding it a relief to be away from her husband, the wife used this time as a happy and secret ritual. She took her time enjoying the serenity of the flowers and bamboo trees surrounding the river. She especially treasured the time she was at the river when there was a full moon. One day, she lost track of time and took longer when fetching the water. Her husband became angry and wanted to punish her. One stormy night, he commanded her to get water. The wind was blowing hard, the rain poured heavily, and the whole land was in total darkness. Because of the weather, she had a difficult time finding her way to the river. Not realizing she was near the riverbank, she walked right into soft wet soil when suddenly she felt herself pulled into the river with great force. The water was whirling and turbulent. It wrapped her with intense raging force. She screamed, but no one heard her. The husband became so angry when she did not come home that he immediately took off to look for her. Other villagers also went. The officer saw the aftermath of the storm and the still flooding river waters. He realized what happened and what he had done. His wife's body was never found, and the Spaniard became repentant, grieved for his wife, and died lonely not long afterwards. One night I was driving out of my neighborhood to head to basketball practice. The neighborhood was surrounded by a thick jungle and a narrow winding road. The road is dark, and moonlight does not penetrate the thick leaves and foliage. Small houses flanked the winding portion of the road, and occasionally they would light the surrounding darkness. The last turn before hitting the main road was the darkest part. You couldn't see beyond the corner, and you'd often be surprised by crossing boars, deer, and people wandering that street. The one night I turned that corner, my blood froze. There she was. The lady in a white dress. Barefoot, long black hair, and a long flowing white dress. I was terrified and shocked. I wasn't sure what to do. I slammed the brakes and stared at her, and she stared back at me. Seconds after we stared at each other, I recognized her. She was one of the girls who lived in the houses outside of my neighborhood. I was relieved. Dark Spirit true story. I was probably about 13 to 14, and I lived in a trailer park at the time, and I and my friend, let's say John, went over to a friend's single wide next to the main office of the trailer park, and anytime you pass that house, it was a dark feeling that you just get. John and I exchanged glances and decided to ignore the feeling. There were probably about 4 of us, and we were all playing Xbox 360 and having fun. One of our friends was playing the piano and stopped and came and sat next to us, and the piano started playing, and we thought our friend was still sitting there playing it, but he wasn't. We all kind of freaked out but didn't worry too much about it. I had a horrible feeling, and I looked down the hallway, and in the bathroom was a tall black figure looking at all of us, and we all looked as it went right back to the bathroom and disappeared. We all freaked out, and I'd why we didn't run out of the house. We ran into his closet, and there were 4 of us in there scared. He had this little kid piano with no batteries right outside of the closet, and it started to play on its own 5 to 10 seconds after we were in the closet. We all bolted out the front door, and his dad came back from the store 10 minutes after all this. I moved out of the park a year later, and I contacted the friend whose house we were at. Let's say his name was Jimmy, and apparently his dad died in that trailer from a heart attack. True story. Terrifying experience I just remembered from when I was in middle school. There was a kid I became friends with in middle school. We were both kind of odd ones out. Both did theater and read a lot and didn't have as many friends. I'll call him Charlie. There was one time Charlie came over to my house. I'm going to try really hard to do this justice because it still sends chills down my spine just remembering. My sister had recently thrown a Halloween party in our basement. There were still black lights instead of regular light bulbs throughout the area. We were hanging out down there, and I wish I remembered more of this conversation, but long story short, Charlie was being very odd. He was saying things that were dark and intense, which I didn't really know how to respond to. He talked about having some sort of dark presence / being possessed. I think he could tell I didn't really believe him and told me he could prove it. Above us were 2 rows of 3 lights. He pointed at the first row's center light. "That light is going to go out," he said. I laughed and waited. After about 30 seconds had passed, I started to say something, and as soon as I did, bang! Not only did the light go out, but it popped so loudly I genuinely jumped. My breath catches, and I just stare at him. He has this unexplainable look in his eyes. His eyes were naturally a dark brown but looked black. It was so intense and unnerving. He did other things during this hangout, such as insult me for playing a lead role in a play at our local theater, which wasn't typically like him. I didn't really know what to do, and he was always around at school, so I just kind of played it off. We played video games, and I did my best to move on. A couple weeks later it was my birthday, and Charlie had been invited over a month ago along with 2 girlfriends of mine, Lana and Chloe. We all met at my house and decided to walk to the downtown area, not even a mile from my home. There was a small path in a heavily wooded area that served as a shortcut. As we were walking, Charlie began talking about graves and death. Chloe, Lana, and I all kind of looked at each other uneasily. I don't remember exactly what Charlie was saying, but it was some genuine, wholehearted tirade about how he was the Prince of Death and it was part of him, or something along those lines. I don't remember what else was said, but he ranted for so long the rants became more of growls in a deep, intense, and booming voice. Suddenly, without provocation, he launched for Lana's neck. He locked on and was full on choking her with all of his strength. I'm not proud of this, but as soon as I saw Lana hit him and get him off her, I just ran. Lana, Chloe, and I all lived in the same neighborhood, just a couple doors down from each other. We sprinted at full speed and didn't dare to look back. I don't really know what I was thinking, but we all decided to split up, so I slammed my door and sat in my room. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. My parents weren't home for some reason, so I just sat there for what felt like hours. Then the police knocked on our door. My older sister answered it. She came upstairs horrified, asking why the police said Charlie had knocked on a neighbor's door with no shirt, no phone, a missing shoe, and banged up. I was horrified. I knew for a fact when we left he still had his phone, shirt, and shoes. A while later my parents got home, and the police came back to question me. I told them everything, and they claimed the other girls had told them a different story. I have no idea why they would do that and insisted I didn't have anything else to tell them. Apparently Charlie had been in and out of psych wards, which I had no idea of, and they had recently adjusted his medication. Nothing further came of that situation with the police, and I didn't see Charlie at school for at least a full year after that. Nothing will ever be able to explain how the light went out, even though it is obvious that the child had mental health problems by society's standards. It will forever leave me unsettled. A story that still gives me goosebumps. So, I don't really talk about this often because it still gives me such an uneasy feeling that it has brought tears to my eyes. I've had a few pretty terrifying experiences in my life that involve ghosts, and I'm interested to see what others think. When I was probably around 8, I went with my dad and stepmom to look at potential houses. We went to this one older home that looked fine from outside. Brick home, pretty front porch, little garden out front. As soon as we stepped inside, we had instant chills and an uneasy feeling. The inside layout was similar to the entrance of the American Horror Story house in the first season, but everything was a dark wood. I had a white teddy bear with me that was a gift from my stepmom, and I sat him on the staircase about 5 steps up. I vividly remember I sat him in the middle of the stairs. I walked around a little bit with him, constantly feeling like something was behind me. It didn't take long for my stepmom to say no, so we left. When I got out of the door, I suddenly remembered that I forgot my bear, so I turned around and ran into the house alone. There was my bear, against the railing with its eyes covered. Guys! These bare arms were not meant to stay in this position. I froze and was instantly overcome with a feeling of terror. I screamed "Dad," grabbed the bear, and ran without looking back. I just felt like something was there chasing after me. I didn't say a word because I knew they would think I was just a kid seeing things. A few weeks later I was in my bedroom, and I remember looking in my closet at the same bear. I have no clue why the hell I didn't just leave the thing at the house, and I noticed something on its face. I walked over to it, and there was a dark mark under its left eye, like a dark teardrop. That bear went into the Goodwill box. I was definitely done. 2 days ago, my family and I went on a trip. I slept on the sofa near the front door one night because my room's AC was not cool enough. I had this weird dream that I let these huge furry creatures inside to have a party. They have huge hands and feet. They look like the Yeti from the Smallfoot movie, except they don't have any heads, and they are green. In this dream, I wasn't scared or anything. I was enjoying their company. I played music, and they ran around the house, jumping over tables and throwing utensils, knives, and forks at each other. Swinging from the hanging lights and knocking over chairs. They looked like kids having fun. After a while, I looked at the time, and it was almost 3 a.m. I told them I needed to sleep, so they must leave now. They don't talk nor make any sound, but I can still tell they were sad by their gesture. They arched their back and dragged their arms, hanging so low that they touched the ground like monkeys. But even if they were reluctant to leave, they still helped clean up their mess. They arranged back the chairs, pulled out the utensils sticking out of the walls, and picked up broken pieces of glass and threw them into the trash. They left one by one, and the last one to leave even handed me a ball. I locked up and turned off the porch light and went back to lie down on the sofa. But as I was about to doze off, the doorbell rang. They're back, I thought. Shaking my head, I took a peek at the peephole, but there was no one there. For some reason I was really scared this time. I haven't even seen whoever was out there, but I know for a fact that it's not a friend. It began banging on the door and twisting the knob violently. It's as if it's forcing its way in. I screamed stop. Really loud. I woke up. Grandma was shocked. She was at the door tiptoeing to look out the peephole. Confused, she asked me why I was yelling at her. She was just going to see who was at the door because she saw a shadow from her window and thought she also heard the doorknob twisting. She was about to open the locks when I pulled her away from the door and told her not to open it without knowing who it is first. I opened the porch light and asked, "Who are you? What do you want?" But no one replied. It was complete silence. I got quite angry and lectured her about the dangers of opening the door to strangers, especially at 3 a.m. What if it was a thief? Or a serial killer? She was quite naive since we're from a quiet suburb. I put her back to bed, but I can no longer go back to sleep. So I sat facing the door with a fire iron poker at hand, waiting to strike whoever tried to come right in. By morning, my little cousin woke up and shouted in joy. "My ball. I thought I lost you. Where did you find it?" She said to me as she grabbed and hugged the inflatable ball from the floor. "I was just lying there," I said. "How funny, we were playing at the beach yesterday when the wind blew it off the walls." "Thank you for getting back," she said as she hugged me. I quickly stood up and looked around, trying to remember my dream. Upon closer inspection, I noticed the tiny holes in the walls. Exact size and location to fit the tines of a fork. I never noticed it before. Maybe it was there before we even got here? I thought as I tried to rationalize. "Breakfast is ready, I squeezed some fresh oranges too, my grandma calls for us." "That is weird, I thought we had enough glasses yesterday," she said as she filled up 5 glasses on the dining table. We booked a family room for 6 people, and part of their amenities is a fully furnished kitchen complete with basic cooking appliances and kitchenware. There were 6 pairs of plates and utensils. But there were only 5 glasses. I went to the kitchen and rummaged through the small trash bin. A shard of broken glass grazed my finger. Enough playing, and come join us, Grandma called for me. Sometimes she forgot I'm an adult now. Anyway, we packed up later that afternoon and left. It's quite a confusing night, but at least no one was hurt, and we still enjoyed our little vacation. Just a random scary story about how I think I had a ghost experience, or I might have gone crazy. This is a completely true story. Thinking about this still scares me and makes me paranoid in a way I wouldn't normally be whenever I hear random singing or sounds in the house. This happened almost 5 years ago. When I was in 7th grade, I randomly decided to stay in my older sister's room because I felt scared. As I'm in there playing on my phone, I randomly start to hear what sounds like a little girl singing in my ear. And I know it wasn't coming from the TV because the sound was barely on and the news was playing. And I and my sister were the only ones upstairs at the time. It sounded like the little girl. I was singing right next to my ear but sounded distant. She kept giggling and singing. I don't know what she was singing about, but it somehow felt familiar, but I couldn't understand because it sounded like English but didn't. I was silently freaking out and wondering if my sister heard it too, but she was asleep. I was pretty terrified when I didn't know where this singing was coming from, but thankfully after a minute or two it stopped. But the next day, I kept hearing weird things. Things like someone breathing right in my ear and footsteps that again sounded close to my ear but distant. Like an echo or something. It sounded like someone was walking on wood floors even though I was upstairs and the floor upstairs is carpet. After a few days it stopped, and I haven't heard anything like that again since that day. I told my mom and sister about it, and they didn't really believe me, assuming I just heard it coming from the TV or that I was a little too tired. But I know what I heard. And even though I know what I heard, I sometimes still try to think of a logical explanation for that day. Maybe I really was going crazy for a second there. I do have past mental health issues. In family history, but I don't know. I don't know why this happened to me, but I pray to God it doesn't happen again. I have a few times. I saw them a lot more as a kid, but it tapered off as an adult. The one that stands out most happened a few years ago. I just moved into an apartment that was built in the late 90s, so not old at all. It was the middle of the night, and my bedroom door was open. I looked out in the hallway, and there was a man in jeans and a t-shirt standing there watching me like he was waiting for me to wake up. He was smiling, but he gave me the creeps. I thought I was probably dreaming, so I just lay back down and went to sleep. The same thing happened a few nights later. He showed up wearing the same outfit, looking at me like he wanted to talk to me. I said, "Go away," and ran toward the door to shut it. My roommate moved in a few weeks later with her dog. The first few weeks were fine, but then her dog stopped wanting to go into the hallway. We had to drag or carry the dog to her room, where she would growl at the door, open or closed, since she had to go through the hallway. My roommate never saw any apparition, but she said she got the creeps in the hallway. So we had our house blessed. Seemed to work because everyone, including the dog, could walk peacefully through the hallway. But that's not the end of the story. There was a woman in her mid-50s or early 60s that lived upstairs by herself. A while after we had our house blessed, I would hear her talking to herself for hours. I thought at first she just had the TV on, but I realized I was only hearing one voice, no background music or anything. The walls were all really thin in the apartment. So she would talk and talk and talk until like 3 in the morning. A few months later her family moved her out suddenly, and the neighbors said it was because they felt she wasn't safe there. It's seriously one of the safest areas to live in. After she moved out, the dog started hating the hallway again, so we had our house blessed and then moved a few months later. I think the man in the t-shirt and jeans really did want to talk, and when we obviously did not want to, he moved upstairs. I think the lady wasn't talking to herself, she was talking to him. If she told her family about a guy that came to visit every few nights a week until 3 in the morning, I'd move her out too. And when she moved out, he came to give us another try. That's my theory, anyway. My grandmother's house is the same one where I spent a great deal of my childhood. It was built in 1914, a gentleman and his 2 sisters lived here before my grandparents bought it. All 3 passed away here, I say here because I'm currently visiting. The house has the original part that's a galley style, almost, with the hallway going straight to the back from the front door and rooms on either side. There have been 2 bedrooms added or closed into what I believe was a wraparound porch, and the upstairs, which originally housed 3 bedrooms, has been shut off and turned into attic space at least since I've been alive, 31 years. Growing up, I had my own bedroom here, which had windows across the top of the wall all the way and a door to the outside that I've never seen open. My grandfather told me that a witch lived between the storm door and the regular door, which was quite unsettling for me when I was 6 to 10 years old. My room is attached to my grandparents' room, which is in the center of the house, meaning no windows. You cannot see your hand in front of your face when the lights are out. This house has never really scared me but has made me uneasy for the entirety of my relationship with it. I spent a lot of nights sneaking into the bed with my grandparents because I got spooked, but that was normal for me wherever I was at that age. Fast forward to 2012, I was married, had 1 son, and had lived in another state but had recently moved back to town with just my son, me, and my dogs. My grandmother had the space, and my grandfather and aunt, who had lived in the house off and on my whole life, had passed away, so my son and I and our dogs moved in with her. Knowing I could get the creeps from being here already, I dismissed a lot of weird noises and happenings at first. Until I couldn't. The first notable instance of true paranormal activity, unexplainable by anything I'm capable of, happened in the middle of the night. My grandmother had moved into the bedroom across the hall. I moved into the bedroom in the center of the house with no windows, and my son moved into the bedroom with the windows and door. It was pitch black in my room, as usual, but I'd felt uneasy for a while that night. I suddenly heard my son's toy go off, a little cow on wheels that, when rolled, played a little banjo tune. It went off in my son's bedroom, and the door between his and mine was open. I lay silent and still as I thought about ways that could have happened. Then it did it again. I mustered enough courage to sit up and look in the room, only to see my son fast asleep, no toy in sight. It happened one more time, but I lay silent and frozen all night. The next morning, I looked for the toy and found it in a bin, with no way of rolling around and no reason it should have gone off in the middle of the night. This incident brought forth all the other smaller and less significant happenings in the house, doors closing, cabinets opening when I was right there in the kitchen, and channels changing on the TV when the remote sat on the table in front of me. Nothing ever scared me, as I felt threatened, but it was there. I moved back out a few short months later and eventually just remembered the incidents on rare occasions or when I visited. However, my grandmother recently had a stroke, and I find myself back here for the 3rd week in a row, staying alone with my, now, 2 sons. I'm receiving the same welcome from whatever spirits are here as I did before. Last week a shadow of some sort walked right down the hall in front of my door, followed by movement on the back porch. Yesterday, I was in the attic and totally alone in the house when a door creaked and clicked shut. Tonight, bits and pieces of Legos are being tossed down the porchway under my feet. I don't know who it is, but they enjoy teasing me. A different kind of ghost story. If you've been to India or read a horror story by an Indian author, you know that we have many kinds of ghouls and that all families have ghost stories passed down through generations. My grandmother, who received this account from her own grandmother, narrated it to me as follows. The year was 1929. It had been a stormy July night. My grandma was returning back home after shopping at the nearest shop, which was 10 miles away. She lived in a village, and the streets through which she was walking were not lit. Therefore, there was complete darkness, save for the occasional lightning in the sky. It was going to rain heavily. She had walked for 6 miles, and seeing that she was just on the outskirts of her village, my grandmother felt relaxed enough to sit under a tree that was on the banks of the Narmada River. Now, since it was so dark, my grandmother could not see that the tree that she had taken refuge under was a peepul tree. Peepul trees, although considered sacred, were also considered to house the spirits of prey and churales, ghosts and female ghouls. This particular peepul tree was believed to be housing the spirit of Leela. Now, every single person in the village knew the story of Leela. Leela had been a low-caste girl, no more than 19 years of age around her death. She had fallen in love with the Englishman who had been assigned to our village. The village had called him Hearsay Sahib, and if gossip was true, then he had been a pretty handsome man. Well, the Englishman had taken a particular liking to Leela, a sweet young girl with long black hair and hazel eyes. The other girls in the village ignored her, and their indifference only increased after Hearsay befriended her, for they too had fancied the young Englishman. But their boycott only led to the Englishman feeling more pity for Leela and thus spending more time with her. The village headman did not approve of friendship between a woman and a man, especially an Englishman. He told Leela's father to warn her, but Leela neglected her father's words. And as surely as rain follows the summer, so did love follow friendship. Hearsay said that he had to go back to England and ask Leela to wait for him. Leela waited for 3 weeks, but then, on the given day, She went to the place where Hearsay and she usually met, the peepal tree present at the outskirts of the town. She waited there in a red sari, the traditional dress of a bride. Morning was followed by evening, and evening was followed by night. Hearsay did not come. Leela sat by the river Narmada and wept. We found her hanging from the peepal tree the next day. In Hinduism, ending self is considered a sin. Supposedly, Leela's family was already from a low caste, and her sins would trouble her father, leading the entire family to be prejudiced against and looked down upon by the village. Fearing this, Leela's family fled the village without giving Leela a proper funeral. The village had then decided to burn Leela's body under the peepal tree from which she ended herself. She was not to be burned at the sacred place where the rest of the dead villagers had been burnt, for fear that her lowly blood would pollute the land. 3 months later, a new collector was appointed who informed the village headman that Hearsay had died in a motor accident en route to England. Now, Leela's ghost resides in that peepal tree, pouncing on whoever happens to be crossing it late at night, crying and screaming hysterically, asking for Hearsay. A few moments after my grandmother had sat down under the peepal tree, she heard the sound of ankle bracelets. She saw a woman approach her, wearing a red bridal sari, with her gung hat drawn down. Although the woman's face was hidden, the sounds that she was producing seemed similar to sobbing. "Who are you?" asked my grandmother, in a shaky voice. "I am Leela," said the woman in the red sari. "I am awaiting Hearsay." Hearing the familiar name, my grandmother understood that the woman was none other than the soul of Leela. My grandmother had observed that to satisfy the spirits in the sacred peepal trees, the villagers would offer things to them, sometimes fruits or sweets or other things. But Leela's peepal tree had never been offered any kind of offerings, as it was thought of as impure rather than sacred. The village folk had restrained themselves from cutting down the trees because they did not want Leela's spiteful spirit lurking inside the village. My grandmother seemed confident that the only reason that the spirit was uneasy was because it had not gotten any offerings. Thus, using her wits, my grandmother took a little container from the bag she had been carrying. Offering it to Leela, she said, "This vermilion was given to me by Hearsay Sahib. He said that it is for you." Hearing this, Leela, or what had been her spirit, grew ecstatic and snatched the little container out of Grandma's hands. In Indian culture, vermilion is supposed to be the symbol of a married woman. Thus, on hearing that it had been given to her by the man who had promised to marry her, Leela's joy seemed to know no leaps and bounds. She looked down at my grandmother, and in that moment, her gung hat fell down, revealing the most enchantingly beautiful eyes that ever existed, and in a frail, grateful voice, Leela said, "Thank you," only to disappear into thin air at the next moment. When my grandmother reached home, she was welcomed by her worried mother, who at first was loving and scared on hearing that my grandmother had encountered Leela's ghost but had later smacked her with a bellend for giving away the expensive vermilion to a ghost. I don't know if Grandma had been successful in providing eternal peace to Leela's soul, but there were no other reports of a red-clad woman pouncing on late-night travelers after that. Now, I don't really know whether this story is true or not. If I were to ever present doubts regarding its authenticity to my grandmother, then the only thing that I would get is a box on the ear. Never stay at the Stanley Hotel, true story. About 10 years ago, I visited a friend and his girlfriend in Colorado. One of those nights was spent at the Stanley Hotel, the infamously haunting and elegiac, and that was the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. Known for being one of the most haunted places in America, it was once a retreat for travelers suffering from tuberculosis. Number count assessments of people who actually died in the hotel have been reported as high as 1,200. As soon as you check in, you can take an optional guided tour of the property inside and out, but we opted to just go to our rooms. Robert and Crystal stayed in the room directly across the hall from me. Upon arrival, the antique scent of aged wood wafted through the building along with just the dusty smell of old, if you know what I mean. We took our tour, and as we walked the tastefully elegant empty halls, it's a rather large building, we began snapping pics of random things, like staircases, doors, and windows. "Weird," Robert commented at one point, as we stood at the bottom of the West Wing staircase. "Ew, that is weird," Crystal shouted. Robert snapped probably 10 photos of the hallway wall at the top of the stairs. In each picture, there was a hovering orb, appearing in roughly the same exact spot each time, the hallway corner directly at the top of the stairs. I snapped pics with my phone too. "Same thing, in the same place. Has to be the glare from that light," I said. We stood at different angles. It appeared. I moved up the staircase about halfway and snapped another picture, and right at that moment, I felt a freezing chill pass through me. "You guys feel that?" "Feel what?" Then, I looked at the photo. The orb appeared, only now, it was on the staircase, hovering wide over the step, just one step, ahead of me. Whoa. Robert and Crystal both cried out. "Dude, a blast of wind just hit me," he said with shock and an air of astonishment. They almost fell over in nervous cackles, not the funny kind, but the "I just got off a roller coaster that I thought would kill me" type, a laugh of exasperation. I snapped a picture of them at the bottom. The orb was directly behind them. "Okay, guys. This isn't a trick of the light." I snapped another photo of the top of the stairs again. Nothing there. What's worse, the floor at the top of the stairs was ours. And not just our floor, but our end of the floor. We had a great dinner that night and hung out at the bar before retiring to our rooms around 1 a.m. or so. We discussed and analyzed the photos from earlier and pretty much laughed it off, but I admit, when I closed the door behind me after finally entering my room, an unavoidable dread started to build inside of me. There was a chair right next to my bed. I froze when I thought I saw a middle-aged man with black hair sitting in it with his legs crossed, just leering at me, so I instinctively flicked on the light. Nothing there. However, after falling asleep, I dreamt of that same man, seated at the side of my bed, making horrific faces at me, like rolling his eyes up into his head with his mouth hanging open and his tongue sticking out the side, like either he was trying to scare me or was just really ill. This is when I woke up, and as I came out of my stupor, I realized that I was lying at the edge of the bed, my head looking directly at the chair. I drifted back to sleep, but the sound of someone's children running and laughing in the hallway kept waking me up. This was true, because I remember seeing several families with children entering and exiting their rooms, but it was absolutely incessant, and at the ungodly hour of 3:17 a.m., I got out of bed and angrily stomped my way towards the door and swung it open. Nobody there. How could nobody be hearing or complaining about this shit? I whispered to myself. Just as quickly as I shut my door and turned around, instantaneously I became covered in goosebumps and felt really off. Just as I began rubbing my arms from what I assumed could have been the air conditioner, I'd become shaken fully awake by an unexplainable rush of alertness. But, there was a perfectly good explanation, which took me about 5 seconds to realize. The sheets on my bed were protruding up into the air about 2 feet, and the end of the sheet was being pressed down against my pillows. And the AC was off. I wasn't staying in that room another second. I tiptoed to the nightstand, which was, of course, on the far end of the bed, and quietly grabbed my phone, not taking my eyes off of the lump under my covers, and again, quietly shuffled my way to the door, when all of a sudden the ice in the bucket on the desk cracked as it melted, and then, a high-pitched giggle emanated from directly in the center of my bed, from under the covers. I ran out of there, not looking back, and banged on my friend's door until Robert swung it open. I told him I needed to stay with them and that I'd sleep on the floor. I couldn't explain the situation at that moment, but I promised to do so in the morning. The next morning, I quickly gathered my things from my room and met them downstairs for breakfast. But before I did, I stopped at the desk. "Hi. Can I help you?" "Yeah. This is weird, but I'm staying on the 3rd floor, and," she finished my sentence. "Room 317, right?" "Yeah. How did you know?" "Because everybody knows. We usually don't book people for that room, but we're full. I kind of expected you." "So, what is it?" Then, she said something that made my blood run cold. "It's just baby Michael. Don't worry, he's harmless." At least I knew for certain that those photos were not glare from the lights and that spending a few hours in a room with baby Michael was exponentially more terrifying than a lifetime of The Shining watch-throughs. The only thing I still ponder is the identity of the man. He still shows up in my nightmares, sitting on the edge of my bed, making faces at me. I woke up in my bedroom. I was a kid, about 10 to 12. In my doorway, there was a white, glowing, person-shaped entity. I couldn't make out any clear details. I believe it was a woman, as it seemed relatively slender and seemed to have long hair. When it noticed me looking at it, it started to glide away from my room down the hallway. I followed it, but it moved much faster than I could. It made no footsteps, but the pictures of me on the wall in the hallway were all crooked afterwards. Its eyes were dark, but it was a white and misty thing. Unaware of what it wanted or what was going on, but the memory is with me to this day, 20 years later. My parents' house was on an acreage/farm. 160 acres with no neighbors. The place was surrounded by trees, so there was no light. I saw it 2 more times, I think. One time when I was riding my quad through the trees on the same property. One more time it was in my parents' house when I was in the basement having friends over. We were in a pillow fort while playing video games. My friends and I witnessed this thing charge at the pillow fort while we were inside of it, and it pushed a lot of it down. It wasn't cinematically scary. But it didn't give me a great feeling. I watch a lot of ghost shows and movies and things now that I'm older and a bit more at ease. Never seen anyone else run into anything like I saw. It's kind of freaky, and I don't often think about this anymore. But thinking about it right now as I lie in bed, my fiancé just said it got super cold in our bedroom. I feel it too. I wouldn't say I believe in ghosts by any means, but this thing in my parents' house give me such a strong sense of paranoia and terror. Their place still freaks me out. I guess this is where I chime in, since I have had 70 years of experiences, some of which cannot be explained, and I am not skeptical about any honestly described experience. When I was 14, we lived for 12 months in a house, up to 100 years old, in a village of maybe 200 people. My widowed mother intended to buy it and did not because this place had every haunted house manifestation you've ever heard of, and it was daily and non-stop. I need to say up front that this went on for the first 8 to 9 months the 5 of us lived there before any of us told anyone what we were experiencing individually. We were not feeding each other's fears. We learned later that the original owner was a doctor who used the living room as a morgue. I do not know whether that was true. I believe the old couple were the primary haunting entities. They seemed unaware of their death and genuinely believed that we had invaded their home. Of my 2 major interactive experiences, the first one, which I'm telling here, scared me at the time. The second one terrified me only after I got older and realized it was the far more dangerous experience. Rumors abounded that the original owner, the doctor, had hidden his wealth in the house. Just like the story of the living room being a morgue, the money may well have been someone's imagination. True or not, just weeks before my mother panicked in reaction to things getting in bed with her and unexpectedly moved us out, I was home alone and decided to search the house and thrill my 11-year-old sister by finding the treasure. I searched every area where the treasures from stories had hidden themselves. I tapped walls, explored closets for secret passageways, and checked for loose fireplace bricks. I even climbed to the living room ceiling, looking for hidden compartments in the wood paneling above the fireplace, though I admit I also blocked open the LR door with a heavy chair, figuring that if things tried to lock me in and attack me, as they had done to my brother, I would be able to dash past them while they were struggling to drag that chair away. I left the upstairs bedroom shared by my 2 brothers for last because I did not like that room. Furthermore, the previous owners had left a large, dark wood wardrobe in one corner that exuded an ominous quality. Valuable antique or not, probably solid walnut, beautiful wood, if I could have, I would have burned it as firewood. The floor in their room had a linoleum covering with a rug over it, but at the head of the bed, the linoleum was unattached to the floorboards. So, I dragged the bed out from the wall far enough to roll back the covering 2 or 3 feet, and, sure enough, underneath were loose boards, and something metal, like one of those Christmas cookie tins, was shining through the cracks between the boards. I thought I had hit the jackpot, and I began prying up the boards with a claw hammer when I heard someone behind me say, clear as a bell, get out of here. I was not sure I had actually heard it, and, still kneeling, I swiveled around in place, but nothing was behind me except that hideously ominous wardrobe. So I went back to work. Moments later, I heard it again, and that time, I knew that whatever was speaking meant it. I had that rug and bed back in place in about 15 seconds, and I ran out of that room, out of that house, down the stairs, straight across the porch and the street, and plopped down on the grass in our neighbor's yard, where I sat looking up at the window and wondering what was under that floor that someone did not want me to find. I never again tried to get those boards up, and I never told anyone what I had done until nearly 25 years later during a conversation about the house with my younger sister when we were both in our 30s. She, of course, said, "You were crazy to do that." I said, "No, I was 14, she said, "but that's where it was," I agreed. Whatever it was under that floor. Now that I am older, more knowledgeable, and have so much more experience and understanding, I am convinced that had I tried to get that metal container out from under that floor, I would have been physically attacked. Whatever or whoever was haunting the house could manifest physically. My brother saw its sleeping form and heard it snoring/breathing. It pinned his arms, it hit the neighbor boy in the back, it got in bed with my mother and crowded against her and tried to push her out of the bed, and it spoke directly to me in a tone of voice that meant to follow up if I did not obey. I sincerely believe the neighbor boy is not the only one who would have been hit in the back or even in the back of my head had I not moved as fast as I did away from that floor and away from whatever was behind me. The most horrifying true ghost encounter was recounted to me by a stripper. A stripper named Cameron shared this story with me. This incident occurred approximately 8 years ago. When she told me this story, she got massive goosebumps and started to quake and shiver. So, I tend to believe that the story really happened to her. Hold on to your hats. Cameron lived in an apartment complex in Portland, Oregon, at the end of a long cul-de-sac, where the street ends in a small circle. On the left side of this street were homes, and the right side of this street was a huge vacant lot, upon which once stood a barn and a home. It used to be a farm, back in the days when Portland, Oregon, like most places in the US, was mostly farms. People lived off the land. They had their own cows, chickens, pigs, potatoes, etc. Back in the day, most people were farmers and supported themselves. Anyway, she used to drive down this road, with the vacant lot to her right, and she would drive down to the left around a sharp curve and down another 1/4 block to the circle, and next to the circle was her apartment complex. She worked as a stripper for about 5 to 6 nights each week. She was saving up for college. Paying her bills. Stripping pays more than McDonald's. One night, around 3 a.m., Cameron was driving home by the vacant lot where the old house and barn once stood. She looked in her rearview mirror and noticed a man, about 30-ish, with long, unkempt brown hair and a beard, wearing overalls, like farmer overalls, running behind her car, about 3 car lengths. He looked extremely angry. She gasped and gave it some gas, and she looked back, and he was gone. This scared her. Why was someone in overalls running after her car in the middle of the street at 3 a.m. in the morning? Anyway, a few nights go by, and she's driving home again, about 3 a.m., and she's driving past the vacant lot, and she looks in her rearview mirror, and it's the same man, running after her car, but this time he is 2 car lengths behind, and she screams a little scream and floors it, and she barely makes the sharp left-hand turn. She gets back, drives into the parking lot, gets out of her car, and runs to her room and locks the door. She then looks out her window at the street, fearing he's trying to find her. She sees nothing. The next day she tells an old lady what happened, and the old lady, who has lived in the apartment complex a long time, tells her that an old man used to live in the farmhouse where the vacant lot now is. The old man died, and the house and barn were torn down, burned down by the fire department, but, for some reason, the land was never converted to new homes or apartment buildings. She didn't know why. People in the area used it as a dog park. Local kids played their various army games and whatnot there. The old woman told her that the old man had a psycho son, who had kidnapped and ended several women and buried their bodies under the barn. She didn't know for sure when that happened, but she suspected it was back in the late 1920s or early 1930s, but she wasn't sure. Anyway, they arrested the son and took him away to the state mental hospital and locked him away until he died. The father remained in the farmhouse, alone, until he died when he was quite old. The story scared Cameron, who decided she had to move. So, she looked for a place to move and found one. She was working at the strip club her last night before the move. Everything was packed, and she was ready to go. She dreaded the thought of having to drive by the vacant lot again. It freaked her out. But she was determined to just not look in her rearview mirror and not look behind her when she drove by. She acted as if the vacant lot didn't exist. She worked. Finally, it was her last day living at the apartment complex. It was her day off, and she decided just to finish packing and relax. Her manager called her, asking her to come in, because several girls didn't show up. She said she couldn't. He was insistent, so she finally agreed. She got off at about 2:30 a.m., changed, and drove back. She dreaded driving by the vacant lot but was happy that this was the last night she would have to do so. Tomorrow, she was leaving for her new apartment. For the last week or so, every time she drove by the vacant lot, she looked straight ahead. It worked. She approached her street. She thought, nope, not going to look back. She started to drive down past the vacant lot, where the old farmhouse and barn once stood. She could feel a chill down her spine. The hairs on her arm stood up. She got the overwhelming sensation that someone was staring at her. Without thinking about it, she looked in her rearview mirror, and she saw nothing. Nothing was chasing her. She was so relieved. She looked back over her right shoulder and noticed that the young man in overalls was sitting in her back seat, on the right side back seat. He was staring at her. She screamed and floored it. She didn't make the sharp turn. She hit the curb, and the car catapulted into the vacant field and kept going until it ran into some thorny hedge. With the car still on, she screamed and opened her door and ran to her apartment screaming, convinced the man in overalls was chasing her. She didn't look back again to confirm that. She screamed so loud that a few people came out of their apartments. They assured her nobody was chasing her. Several of the men went to her car, looked around, and found nobody. They turned off and locked her car and gave her the keys. She didn't sleep that night, fearing the man in overalls would come to her door. He didn't. She left at first light. That is what Cameron told me. She was shaking and had huge goosebumps when she told me this story, which is why I believe her. I have several, to be honest, but one of the most vivid memories I recall was during my time living in a newly constructed home. We moved in when I was 9 years old, and my mother would often burn incense, sage, and similar items. We thought she was just being weird because she had never done anything like that before. She said it was because my brother kept seeing things in his room, and I made the mistake of saying that I would swap rooms with him so he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. I thought he was crazy until one night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a disgusting, creepy, barely humanoid figure standing in my doorway. I just thought I was seeing things, so I turned my lava lamp on next to my bed so I could see clearly. There was nothing there but a weird shadow, so I brushed it off and went back to sleep. I woke up later that night to a very strange feeling brushing over me. I cannot really describe it, but it was not right at all. I looked up from my bed and peered over toward the doorway when I saw two bright red orbs flying around. The orbs combined and landed on a pile of sticky notes I had left on my bookshelf next to the door. The sticky notes caught on fire. The orbs burned for a short while without spreading, although it almost didn't seem like fire. It was the closest description I could provide. It was just a really bright, small, red and white light. I was terrified, so I put the duvet covers over my head and tried to go back to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and the sticky notes were gone. In their place was a pile of soft black sooty ash, which had blown onto the carpet and onto the tiled floor outside my bedroom door. I didn't tell anyone about this for a while until maybe a few months later when I decided to mention the disgusting weird figure in my doorway to my brother. We both described seeing the exact same thing in high detail for each other. We didn't stay in that house for too long after that. Even my mom knew it was there. I haven't slept with my door open since. I just had one of my weirdest encounters with a ghost or something. A friend of mine recently had a burglar break into their home, so because I'm a paranoid person, for the rest of the week this little thought of someone breaking into my home has been living rent-free in my head. Cut to today, I fell asleep and had the weirdest nightmare in a long time. I haven't had a true nightmare since I was a kid. In my dream, my family and I lived in a funeral home, which contained 4 corpses that were supposed to be prepared for a funeral. However, as the dream progressed, I was always asked to do chores in the same room as them. I think in the dream the place where they were stored always changed. Whenever I entered the room with them, they seemed to become more active. After the first time, the father of the family began to appear behind every door I opened. Initially, I only saw him for short durations, catching glimpses of him behind the glass of some doors. As the dream continued, this got worse until the corpse was behind every door that I would open, and at the last time, the corpse would move his head, which looked like he got increasingly beaten up as the dream progressed until there was only a bloody pulp where his face should be, and he started speaking to me, but at this exact moment, I woke up. After falling asleep again for the second time, I had the same dream, except the second time, in addition to the father thing, the child was getting more and more ducked up, which led to me waking up. This time, however, I can't fall asleep because I hear something that sounds like a drill, and I think to myself that it's weird to drill something in the middle of the night. Then my paranoia kicks in, and I start to turn on all the lights and make my way downstairs because I now fear that someone's trying to break in. As I reach the end of the stairs, I look towards the door, and I see a white face looking through the glass at me and then moving its head away so I can no longer see it. I instinctively move towards the door to open it but stop at the handle. The only thought through my head at the moment was, let's not invite whatever this is into my house, be it burglar, ghost, or whatever. All this happened at 3 a.m., and it's now about 4 a.m. as I'm still sitting in my living room refusing to go to sleep. As I'm writing this, I have still heard some noises outside, so I'm going to be awake until 5 a.m. just in case. Sharing some ghost stories. I'll be sharing some ghost stories with you guys. I have many. This will be the first. So I and my cousin were around 15 to 16 around this time, and we just left a high school party. We were rushing back because his mom would go to late night church. We get to his house wasted, only to find out that we are locked out because she locked the doors and none of his siblings were home. BTW, it's an apartment complex. We tried the front and the back door and checked if windows were open, and nothing. As we sit on the front porch just sitting and thinking, man, my aunt is going to kill us for being wasted and out late, after sitting there for 10 minutes, we keep banging on the door, thinking his little brother was home alone because he always was. Suddenly, we hear the doorknob jiggling, and the door opens a little but just enough to make a crack, and then my cousin goes, "Damn, Nelson, WTF? We were out there for mad long." The door, after he pushes it, hits the back wall. I and my cousin froze. He looked behind the door and said, "Did you just see that?" I remember being in disbelief. Nobody was home, we searched the entire place. 2. So this was another random night. If I recall correctly, my cousin Alex and I decided to stay in one night. We were up late watching movies and shows. Mind you, at this point we kind of knew this place was haunted, and we would always hear things moving on their own, and it was the kind of place where you always felt someone watching you. It was a 2-story type of apartment. And at the top of the stairs, often it would feel like someone would be at the top looking down at you. To be honest, the presence of this spirit felt intense, not angry, not sad, yet very powerful, too powerful for my liking. It was definitely a male ghost. Anyways, one night we were up late watching movies and TV shows. And we got hungry. It was around Thanksgiving because I remember we heated up leftover turkey and were destroying it in the kitchen. We were standing, eating, and laughing really hard about something. All of a sudden we hear a far hey, muffled yet close enough to get our attention. He and I looked at each other, and he said, "Did you hear that?" And I was like, "Yeah, it probably came from outside." It was late, and there were people outside still. Then all of a sudden, a louder hey made us both stop talking and our eyes go wide, because this time the hey came from what we both agreed was inside. The freezer was in a traditional fridge that was in the kitchen. We both froze and looked in the direction of the fridge, which was away from the windows, ruling out anyone from outside. My hair stood up, and my eyes watered up because I have never till this day ever had an audio spirit speak. It's more like things moving on their own, etc., as if someone's head were in the freezer itself. Lastly, it goes one last time, hey. It was so loud I dropped my fork and ran past the kitchen with my back towards the living room, and I was like, "Bro, WTF was that?" He opened the freezer and then slammed it closed. He looked at me in disbelief. Nobody lives upstairs or downstairs from them, so there's no chance it was coming from the direction it was. We ran upstairs so fast and went into his room. Mind you, we were like 16 and big for teenagers. We played sports, and we didn't really believe in ghosts in the sense that they can manifest, just that we knew spirits are real. And we weren't the chicken type. That was the first and last time I received a direct audio message from a ghost, but I have many other stories to share. Now that I'm older, it makes perfect sense that spirits use electronics to charge themselves to manifest and/or power up. I think he was using the fridge's power to speak to us. It was by far one of the scariest experiences I have ever had. I am used to seeing shadowy figures and things moving, but I have never heard a voice trying to speak to me. BTW, I'm from Rhode Island, and Rhode Island is really haunted. 3. Okay, this is the last major event at this apartment. This event likely occurred in the summertime, after all the previous events, because I remember that I was around 17 or 18 years old at that time. Alex and P have an older brother. They have a lot of siblings, 7 total siblings. They have a big brother named Jay, and he is in the active military. He just did a tour, and his wife, who just gave birth to their second baby, Angie, was coming over to his mother's house in Alex and P's haunted apartment to surprise Jay because he was coming home. So she stayed a weekend at the creepy apartment. We offered her a room to stay upstairs, but she declined and stated it was okay for her to sleep in the living room downstairs. So she ended up staying with us that summer. She was home alone, I and the boys were out. I can't remember what we were doing that Friday, probably up to no good. Their mom was at church, and Angie was home alone, hanging out in the living room, when she said dishes were clanking and moving on their own in the kitchen. She says the entire time staying at the apartment she felt like someone was watching her. Angie goes to take a shower, and she said she felt like someone was standing right near the shower. She believes in spirits. She said when she was done taking a shower, she said she saw a shadow under the door, thinking one of us got home. Of course, to no one's surprise, nobody was home, and she got creeped the F out. During the day everything is good, fast forward and it's nighttime on a Friday or Saturday. I can't remember which day, but she was sleeping on the couch, and her baby was 4 around the time he stayed in our room with us. She slept by herself. She says she was sleeping around 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. when she had a nightmare, and her eyes flew wide awake, but she couldn't move her body and felt like she was being choked. She got sleep paralysis. She was able to keep her eyes open but couldn't move her body. She said that she was looking around and it felt like someone was watching her. If anyone has gotten sleep paralysis before, you know it's one of the worst feelings in the world. She was trying to grasp for air and cry for help, but she couldn't. She just had to sit there and feel like she was being held down. She looked over to the kitchen and said that she saw a shadow standing towards the kitchen. She felt a dark aura and presence. She said that she only got sleep paralysis when she was little, so it was weird that she hadn't experienced it in a long time. She was embarrassed to tell us because it was the first time we met her because she lived in Virginia at the time, so she didn't want to make herself seem crazy. She said that the experience scared her a lot and stressed her out, and she later remarked, "I'm never staying over there again," once we got to know her better. My aunt ended up doing a cleansing at that apartment. Eventually he dwindled down, the spirit, and he stopped being overly aggressive, but it still felt like he was watching you at times. They eventually moved out. My cousin and I were between 19 and 23 when we got our own place. 4. This one will be shorter, because it was an average night. We actually were just hanging out in my cousin's room, Alex's room, so Alex has an older brother, you can call him P. He's a little older than us by at least 3 years, so when we were 15, he was like 18. So I and my cousin Alex were hanging out in his room upstairs this time. We didn't like watching TV in the living room anymore because, obviously, you guys know why. It is approximately 10 p.m., and my cousin P returns from football practice on a Friday evening. So one night we are just watching movies. It was wintertime. My cousin P goes to take a shower. 20 minutes later, while all of these stories unfold in the apartment, my cousin comes in looking pale, not breathing, and making the huffing noise that occurs when someone gets the wind knocked out of them. Then, to our surprise, he literally starts crying. TBH, what makes this scary as hell to me is that he was older than us and was like a long-time babysitter. We would always look up to him. He was definitely not on the chicken list. He was big as hell at the time, and if you saw him, you would think, this kid looks like he wouldn't be scared of anything. He's older than us too, so he comes in huffing and out of breath. It takes him 2 minutes to finally speak, and then he, lets out air like he was being choked from how scared he was and starts crying. We ask him, WTF is wrong with you? Are you good? Before he started crying, we thought he was messing with us because he grabbed my cousin by the shoulder dramatically. After he settles down, we're like, dude, WTF? He goes into the room after shutting off the bathroom light in the hallway. It's pitch black in the hallway at the top of the stairs. He says when he shut off the bathroom light and was coming to the room to join us, there was a large dark shadow standing in the doorway of the bathroom, and it went towards him from the corner of his eye, but it went past him into his bedroom that's right next to my cousin Alex's bedroom. He slept in the same room with us that night, and he hates bringing that story up because they hated that apartment, and it scares the shit out of me because he wasn't around for those other stories. So it was just confirmation that it's not just haunted, but it's definitely powerful and that we weren't ducking crazy, and also he was older and less superstitious, and it was just a random night. We built our home more than 20 years ago, but it's on land that had old farmhouses and orchards on it. We found lots of odd things when first landscaping and gardening. There has been a plethora of activity since about the first year we lived here. As a sensitive, I attribute much of this original activity to my pregnancies. I believe that children see what adults can no longer because they're not far from the gulf. Thus, carrying a child inside you brings you back closer to that threshold. One time in particular when our first two were still little, 2 and 5, my husband and I were settling in for sleep, alarm set, lights turned off, him spooned up behind me. Now the layout of our bedroom is that my side faces the double doors into our room. As a child, I always wanted my sibling to be in this position so the monsters would get her first, but as a mother, I wanted the door position so I could respond to my babies in the night. Just as we were dozing off, I felt a slight movement through the air from my side of the bed, up and over me towards the ceiling, moving over us. As this movement passed us, I heard a little boy, 6-ish years old. I have lots of nieces and nephews, so I can age a child by the cry or voice with amazing accuracy, cry out, "Mom Miwi." It startled me so much I exclaimed out loud and quickly sat up in bed, asking my husband, "Did you hear that?" I was immediately overwhelmed with feelings of sadness and protective instincts, like I needed to respond to this little boy and find him. We both jumped up, flipping the lights on, and went across the hall to check on our children. Both were out cold, completely dead to the world like only children can be. It wasn't until I finally calmed down and got my tears under control that my husband, who is a major skeptic of everything, admitted that he'd heard it too. Over the years, I have experienced movement in my peripheral vision, objects disappearing and then reappearing in strange, illogical places, and sounds that cannot be easily explained. One Christmas about 3 years ago, our eldest, 19 at the time, had helped us finish wrapping gifts, and the 2 younger kids were in bed. We decided to watch a show and relax before going to bed. As the 3 of us were sitting there was a shadow, about the size of a 6-year-old child, crouched slightly, darting across the doorway from the hallway near the laundry room into the kitchen. It's a great room layout, so it's really a false doorway, think archway. We all looked over and then looked at each other. Our eldest asked, "Did you just see that?" I nodded my head. "Yep." "Dad? I saw something." "Mom, what did you see?" "I saw a little boy sneaking past the doorway into the kitchen." My husband immediately got up, went to the kitchen, and turned on all the lights. There was no one but us. He went immediately upstairs to check on the other 2, but they were fast asleep. To this day, my husband insists that it must have been our son, but he cannot explain how a 16-year-old boy who was 6 feet tall and as clumsy as a young puppy could have come downstairs, sneaked past us to the laundry room, then gone back through the doorway into the kitchen, and finally gone upstairs to get into bed and pretend to be asleep in less than 20 to 30 seconds. I know the truth, and it's okay that he can't fully process it. I don't know what I saw, scary/paranormal? New Zealand is a beautiful country. It has a very similar appearance to the United Kingdom, but the southern island in particular is so sparsely populated that it's almost creepy. Because the population is so small in the southern island, anyone can buy a mansion surrounded by acres of land for the same price as the average American home. It was beautiful beyond belief, but seeing so many massive homes with so few people or even cars on the road was chilling. When I went, it was purely for a friend reunion between my dad and his best friends from secondary school, and I wasn't sure what to expect when we got there, but it was strange. We flew into Christchurch, and one of my dad's friends, my godfather, lived only an hour outside of the city. It was more of a village than a city. He came to pick us up from the airport, and we all drove to his house, which I was expecting to be a standard 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, but instead it was a 6-bedroom, 4-bathroom house with a massive kitchen, 2 living spaces, an octagonal foyer where the dogs slept, 3 patios, and a landscaped garden so massive that it would have taken me an hour just to walk the perimeter. He said they got it for cheap, but I definitely wouldn't complain. It was a gorgeous house. While all of the adults were settling into one of the living spaces, my brother and I decided to go explore the property. We get serious anxiety when we're not familiar with the structure we're staying in, so our first objective was to just map out the entire house and the surrounding gardens. It just makes us more comfortable to know where we can go in the event of an emergency. The house was mapped within 10 minutes, but the garden took me a lot longer. Because some of the bushes were planted at such off angles, it took me a while to really navigate it and figure out where everything was. Some of the hedges were only up to my waist, but a few of them were as tall as the house and made for an eerily claustrophobic walk between them. I didn't think too much of it, and once I had completely mapped the property in my mind, I returned to the house. My godfather's wife, technically my godmother, was just starting to make dinner and offered to let me make the dessert. I was pleased to help since it would be completely fresh, and learning to make an apple pie seemed like a fun skill to have. We made the pie, and by the time dinner was actually done, the sun had long since set, engulfing everything outside of the house in a seemingly perpetual darkness. It was a little too dark. The adults were all having fun catching up with each other, and a short time after dinner, they all decided that they wanted to go for a drink. My godfather has some good memories of drinking with my dad, so they wanted to pull out those old memories again. My godmother wasn't particularly thrilled since that meant me and my brother would be left alone to take care of the house and the dogs, but I assured her that it would only be a few hours and that we could do it. It didn't take much convincing, but she did set a rule that we were not allowed to let the dogs outside at all. I was okay with that since it was below zero and it was so dark that even with the motion-activated lights, it still had so many dark corners and blind spots that I wouldn't feel comfortable even if I had to let the dogs out. They left, and the dogs retired to their kennels on their own. We figured that they would be okay, so my brother and I planted ourselves on the sofa. The TV was turned on, but neither of us was watching it since we were both on our phones. We didn't really talk that much since he was an angsty 13-year-old boy and I was the mature 17-year-old sister messaging her classmates and friends on the other side of the world. It couldn't have been more than 30 minutes after the adults left that all of the dogs started aggressively barking in the foyer. There were 4 of them, and all of them were snarling and snapping at the front door. Naturally, the noise had caught both of our attention, so we circled into the foyer to see what was up, and the largest dog, which I think was a Great Dane, was frantically scratching at the front door to get out. We were both confused, and I went back into the kitchen to look out the window. If someone was at the door, then it would have been obvious. But there was no one there. I didn't see anyone, and since our family has never owned a dog, we just assumed they were barking at something small like a firefly or a moth. I went back into the foyer to help my brother put the dogs back in their kennels, but the Dane's paw flicked the door handle, and the icy wind threw it open. My brother and I both stopped to cover our faces from the large and sharp snowflakes now stabbing our skin, and we both cursed as the dog ran out, but the other 3 stayed in the foyer, still barking a deafening warning throughout the entire house. "Stay here. I'll get her," I called, shaking my phone so the flashlight would turn on, and booked it into the snow, no shoes, socks, or anything even resembling winterwear. I was only wearing a thin pair of skinny jeans and an off-the-shoulder blouse. Over the wind, I could barely hear the dog, already far in the distance, barking so loudly that it should have been easy to follow her. Originally, I tried to stay on the lit gravel trails that surrounded the house, but I couldn't see the dog at all. I could hear her barking, and I could see the trail in the snow that she had kicked up, but the snow was coming down so heavily that her trail was almost completely buried in a matter of seconds. Looking at the hedges, I had a thought that if there really was someone out here that the dog was chasing, then there were so many places they could have been hiding that it would have been physically easy for them to sneak up on me, especially over the noise of the wind. The goosebumps I had gotten on my arms from the cold didn't hold a candle to the goosebumps I got from stepping off of the trail. Every part of my body was screaming at me to just leave the dog and go back inside, but I may have been more afraid to explain to my godmother that I lost her dog. A ridiculous thought after the fact, but in the moment, it was just as scary. Every step in the snow was colder than the last, and with the greatest hesitation, I started looking between the waist-high hedges, trying to listen in for the dog, but the wind was throwing the barking sounds all over the place. One moment he was in front of me, the next he was behind me. It was confusing me, and looking all around me had stilled my sense of direction. I could barely see the house, and the barking was only getting quieter. My flashlight was dotting all over the place while my free hand held my hair back so it wasn't lashing at my face. Calling the dog's name did nothing to help, and as I finished searching around the smaller hedges, the dreadful reality hit me so hard. The dog had gone into the tall hedges. If my survival instincts weren't panicking before, they definitely were now. Even pointing my phone's flashlight down the straight trail between the bushes, I couldn't see the end, even though my earlier mental mapping told me that it was only a 7 to 10 meter walk. It just narrowed into a black vortex that swallowed every ray of light from my flashlight. I swear when I took the first step forward, my heart physically rebelled against me, drumming through my ribs so fast and so hard that I was feeling lightheaded at the very idea of going in there. Every part of my soul hoped to God that the dog was still somewhere closer to the house, but this prayer immediately shattered when the dog's barking turned to terrified whimpers. Directly in front of me. Far too close for comfort, and I knew that the dog was right in front of me, but over the blizzard-like weather, I couldn't see it at all. My hand pulled out of my hair to keep my heart from bursting out of my chest, and I dared to step forward. The snow was already above my ankles, and being barefoot, the immersion in this previously wintry paradise turned to an iced-over hellscape. Never in my life had I experienced something that terrified me so much that the idea of even walking would rip my soul from my body. There were two conflicting trains of thought going through my mind. If I went forward to find the dog and someone really was out here, then I could get myself hurt or kidnapped, and if I went back to the house, then the person or whatever the dog was barking at could see my light retreat and chase after me. Neither option was favorable. I couldn't tell you why, but even with the dog whimpering, I forced myself to move towards it. I kept my light directed at every inch of those shrubs and their diverging paths. Any place that I thought someone could hide, I lit up with the best of my ability. And then a shriek so guttural yet so high-pitched that it caused the acid in my stomach to boil. My breathing became frantic as I shined the light around me, trying to figure out what had caused such an unnatural sound. It couldn't have been the dog. It may have been the shriek of a woman, but even this would have been a stretch to claim. It didn't sound like any animal I had ever even heard of, but as I pointed my light into one of the shrub corners, the bush curled back. Something was climbing on top of it. My light pointed at the top of the bushes, but I barely caught sight of a black shadow leap over the top of the hedges, far bigger than any of the animals on the property, dog or otherwise. It was much larger than the dogs, but it was also bigger than any human I had ever seen. Breathing was suddenly labored, and I regretted ever leaving the house, but as I followed where the bushes were moving, it stopped straight ahead of me. My light lit up the statue at the end of the narrow trail, a naked mermaid hugging her abdomen with her head cocked to the side. This was the statue I had seen earlier. But it didn't look like that now. In the minimal light, somehow it more closely resembled a contorted and screaming face, its jaw dislocated and hanging only from one side with its neck snapped back at a critical angle. I swear I fainted on my feet. I couldn't hear the dog anymore. The snow was coming down harder than ever, but at this point, I didn't care about getting in trouble with my godmother or my parents. The flashlight stayed on the statue for too many long seconds, and the same shadow flew past right behind the statue. I screamed bloody murder and just turned to run, but the snow was disorienting, and even as I tried to get out of the maze of hedges, I couldn't find my way. My light went in every possible direction just trying to make sure that whatever I saw wasn't following me. It was impossible to tell. The blizzard wouldn't allow me to see even 10 feet in front of me, and it was so loud that even if that thing was following me, I couldn't hear it. And then a firm hand grabbed onto my arm. My heart stopped, and an all too familiar voice played through my ear, "You big Jesse. Get inside before you get hypothermia." It was my brother. He was giving me his annoyed and irritated face as he moved to grab my arm, pulling me back towards the house. He couldn't see it either, but he remembered which route he took through the shrubs. It only took us about 30 seconds to find the trail again, at which point I just grabbed his hand and pulled him to run back inside, throwing the front door closed and locking it tight. "What's wrong with you?" He buzzed monotonously, crossing his arms. The Dane had run back to her kennel before we had arrived and was shaking violently. "Please tell me you went out looking for the dog as well." "What? Did you leave the house to go look for the dog?" He could see that I was freaking out and just rolled his eyes. "No. I've seen horror movies before, so I decided to stay back and not follow the dog into a blizzard." At this point I was freaking out, looking out of the windows next to the door to make sure that I could see nothing, but almost as soon as I looked, the outdoor light automatically turned off, swallowing the entire garden in complete darkness. He sighed. "I only came out when I heard you scream." "Why did you scream?" I tried to explain what I had seen, but he just said I was hysterical and dismissed it. He tends to not believe me when I tell stories like this, and it's not the first time I've seen something so unbelievable that nobody else even considered the possibility that it was real. I was called a drama queen and a fantasist, but I don't even like horror movies or anything scary. I'm prone to nightmares. Why would I add fuel to the fire by coming up with something like this? My parents and godparents didn't believe me when I told them, and my godfather specifically said, "Spooks tend to roam." That didn't help. I do believe in ghosts and spirits, but the ones that I have seen personally never physically interacted with my surroundings like this one did. It was easily the most terrifying thing that I had ever experienced, and after this day I vowed to never get a dog. Dogs are cute, and they're lovable, I admit it, but cats are infinitely smarter. If they see or sense danger, they run. They don't chase it down. I can be satisfied with only having cats in my life. At least they won't give me a panic attack while trying to chase them down, and most won't run out into dangerous weather. To this day, I still don't entirely know what happened in those shrubs or what I saw, but my brother promised me that he was in front of the house almost the entire time, and my parents had taken pictures with my godparents at the pub that was 30 minutes up the road, sending them to us while they were still there and still drinking. If it was a person, I don't know who it was, and if it wasn't a person, then I have no idea what it was. A part of me doesn't ever want to know. Ghost stories from the corporate world. Being the logical, corporate world, there is hardly any space for ghost stories and theories. However, this one I can't ignore. I, 27M, work as an operations manager for a multi-service company. I work on the 17th floor of a massive high-rise office building in the middle of town. Most days I waste away with my spreadsheets and inventory, passing the day in front of my computer. Other days I actually visit my sites and talk to my staff. The building I am in has staff of mine in it, but only 4 of them, so I rarely see them, as they are generally on the other floors, hard at work. Only after 2 weeks of being with the company did I realize that 3 floors of the building have no tenants. Just 800 square meters of empty, dark rooms with thin walls and dark blue carpets. Each floor has 3 bathrooms, male, female, and paraplegic, which we service only once a month if there are no tenants on the floors. All seemed normal until one day my elevator ride from my office floor to the ground was unintentionally stopped on one of the empty floors. I poked my head out of the elevator thinking there was someone getting on, only to notice we had stopped on floor 14. The uninhabited floor. My body went cold as I stared into the empty hallway, noticing nobody around. I crept back into the elevator and looked at the buttons to see if I accidentally pressed it. Nothing. The only floor glowing was the ground floor. Strange. I pressed the close doors button, but the elevator wouldn't close. I began to panic. I stepped out of the elevator and pressed the outside button, hoping another elevator would show up. I stood quiet for a moment and watched as the elevator I had just exited started to close, and I was just not quick enough to grab the doors. There he stood, alone in the dark next to the empty office and the eerie sound of the wind blowing against the building. I bolted for the fire escape stairs when I heard it. The chilling sound of a bathroom stall door closing in the female toilets. I stopped for a moment and turned to face the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and wind was blowing through it. I was immediately horrified. You see, the door is one of those hydraulic doors that close on their own. Someone had to be holding it open from the inside. I panicked and ran out the fire escape doors, down the stairs all the way to the ground. In a huff I ran to security to go back up to the floor and check out the bathroom. The security thought I had gone mad, as the floor was empty, and just assumed someone from another office had come down for a more private bathroom break. We got to the floor and walked all around. Nobody in the women's bathroom, nobody in the men's. Who could it have been? I asked. Security said they would check the tapes and get back to me. What really creeped me out is that all the stall doors were locked. Maintenance hasn't unlocked them, as there are no tenants. A few days had passed, and I had completely forgotten about the experience. Back to my normal programming of sitting behind a desk and focusing on the logical processes of my day-to-day. Late Friday afternoon I get a knock on my door from 3 of the security asking me to confirm my story from a couple days ago. I explained myself again and told them what I had seen, and they stared at each other in a rather weird manner. I asked them what was going on, and they explained to me the following: nobody came to the floor. The security footage didn't catch anyone on the floor. Not even me. I stood in silence. Sir, are you sure it was floor 14? I was certain of it. Each floor has a sign. They assured me they checked each floor to see where I had popped up, but nothing. Here's where it gets more intense. There are tapes of me walking out of the elevator on the ground floor. Normal and mundane. I asked the security for the footage myself. And that's when I saw it. On the top right corner of the camera facing the doors of the office on floor 14, the face of a woman. I know she's there. And she knows I exist. I have lost 17 kilograms in the last 2 months, as I no longer take the elevators. A Philippine ghost story. I like a good ghost story. When I was younger, there were these series of books called Haunted Philippines and True Philippine Ghost Stories that contained ghost stories and paranormal experiences from various people across the country. Some stories were in English, while the rest were in Tagalog. They were quick to read and had numerous volumes. Sometimes they even had a section of ghost pictures near the end. You know the kind, nonchalant landscape or family pics with a blurry figure circled in red. Some of them actually looked convincing and downright creepy. I loved that series, though I should have enjoyed them while they lasted. As of last year, they seem to have been discontinued and are difficult to find in bookstores now. To me, these books were just good entertainment. Growing up in the Philippines provided no shortage of ghost stories and mythical legends. It seemed like everyone had a story to tell or knew someone who had one. I've had a handful of relatives in my family who claimed to have had encounters with a ghost, or multo, as we called them in our native tongue. I never thought I'd have my own stories to share, but that quickly changed very recently. My family and I had recently taken a trip back to the Philippines. It was long overdue, as I had not seen my relatives in my home country in several years. It was a bit strange to see all my younger cousins grown up. It was a great experience just to see them all again and spend time with them. On our first week there, we were on our way back to my aunt's house from a long day of shopping when the conversation in the car turned to supernatural occurrences. Our culture is heavy on religion and tradition, and we can be very superstitious at times. There are numerous stories of mythical monsters in Filipino culture, and hearing about them from my parents and relatives only furthered my interest. They included the tikbalang, which was a monster that frequented the forests and the mountains. It is described as a large humanoid creature with the head and limbs of a horse. So, basically BoJack Horseman. The kapre was more of a tale for kids. It's described as a tall troll-like creature that resides in large trees, where it smokes a cigar, waiting to scare off children that are out too late at night. He's usually regarded as non-violent, though. Another one is a chanak, and they're the stuff of nightmares. In remote areas near forests, you'd hear the faint crying of a baby. If you followed these sounds deep into the woods, it could lead you to being perpetually lost. Or if you were really unlucky, you'd find the source. You'd stumble upon what looks like a baby on the ground, but in actuality it's a small ghastly creature that will transform and eat you if you get too close. Then there's the aswang, a shapeshifter that feeds on human flesh at night. A specific species of them, called a manananggal, which translates literally to remover, is a particularly terrifying one. By day they are in the form of a regular woman, but by night, they feed. They root their legs to the ground as their top half detaches itself, sprouts bat-like wings, and takes flight. They mainly target pregnant women, and they have long, vine-like tongues that slither down and eat the fetus as they hover right outside the window. I know, pretty crazy stuff, right? I've always regarded these tales with a healthy amount of salt and a full dose of fear. They were cool and unique, but I could happily live the rest of my life not encountering any of them if they were indeed real. Even when I moved to America, I was still wary of those regional creatures. Anyways, during the car ride, my cousins spoke of strange sightings and experiences they've had, all with varying degrees of believability and silliness. My dad relayed some tales from his younger years about how his group of friends would encounter this and that. He was always ever so dramatic with his storytelling. It was all in good fun, but throughout the whole conversation, my mom remained quiet. She was the hard skeptic type and would always dismiss those stories as silly folklore. However, at that moment, it looked like she had something to say. My curiosity took over, and I finally asked her if she had any ghostly encounters. She looked at me and nodded. Back during her college years when she was studying to be a nurse, she lived on the campus of a very old school not too far from the city I was born in. Living conditions were pretty rough, and 4 of them had to share a room half the size of a normal American college dorm. On top of that, the campus used to be an infirmary during World War II. Hundreds of soldiers from both sides passed through and died within the walls of that hospital. Residents of the dorms would speak of strange noises in the night. Footsteps, faint echoes, and knocking were heard in certain parts of the building. There were rumors that the place was also a temporary orphanage at one point in time and that a handful of children had died there. They said you could hear children's laughter in the walls if you listened closely. On more than one occasion, my mom and her roommates would wake up to faint shuffling noises in the room, like someone small was moving about. When they looked around, they wouldn't see anyone, so they dismissed it and went back to sleep. It wouldn't be until the following morning that they saw what looked like footprints on the walls and ceiling. They were the size of a child's. One of her roommates moved out after that. One night, a close friend of my mom was heading back to her room after a late study session. She was wary of the supernatural, so she kept her head down and walked quickly through the halls. As she passed by one of the empty rooms, something caught her eye. That large room used to be a triage area when the place was still a hospital. The old rusted beds were left there abandoned, and the room was used for storage. She said she saw half a dozen men lying on the beds. They looked injured and bandaged, and they wore what looked like the uniform of an American soldier from World War II. She stood frozen in place as she felt the coldest chill she'd ever experienced in her life. Then one of the soldiers sat straight up and slowly turned towards her. That was enough to snap her back to her senses, and she took off running towards her room. When she got to her dorm and told her friends what she saw, the brave ones of the group headed to the room to investigate. When they got there, the beds were empty. Ever the skeptic, my mom didn't put much stock in those stories. That is until one early morning, when she experienced something that challenged her stance and bothers her to this day. In the mornings before classes, my mom would wake up extra early so she could get first dibs on the showers in the community bathrooms. It wasn't too hard, since a lot of the residents had convinced themselves that the place really was haunted and were unwilling to venture out on their own that early. My mom mostly ignored those stories, and she always got to class early. That morning she did her usual routine, and it went off without a hitch. As she was walking back to her room, she heard it. She said it sounded like whispers. She stopped and turned around. Down the hallway, a figure stood just at the edge of darkness. The lights weren't in the best condition in that wing, so it was dim. Still, my mom could discern that the figure was dressed like a nun. That didn't make any sense, since there were no nuns on campus, and the nearest church was several miles away. Staying completely calm, my mom turned and walked away. She quickened her pace, and her own footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She strained to hear any other noises but heard none. When she turned right to another hallway, she saw the nun from the corner of her eye. It was closer and definitely following her. As she got closer to her dorm, she turned around once more. The nun was at the end of the hall, just as far away from her as when she first saw her. The nun stood still, as if she'd been standing there the whole time. My mom quickly reached her door and struggled to unlock it. Daring one more look, she turned to her left, but the nun was gone. Relieved, she turned the lock. As she did, she moved to pick up her stuff and felt an unnaturally cold chill. She slowly looked right, and it was right there. The nun. On the other end of the hall. Except now she was much closer. And fully in the light. On instinct, my mom turned the knob and threw her door open. And that's when the child ran out. A small, kindergarten-aged child ran out of her dorm room, brushed past her leg, and ran towards the nun. The child was laughing innocently, as if playing a game of tag. My mom watched as the child ran past the nun and disappeared into another room. After a few moments, the nun turned and followed the child. My mom asked around after that experience and learned that the last time there were children or nuns on the campus was back when it was a temporary orphanage several years ago. They shut it down after a tragic fire ended a dozen children and a few nuns looking after them. She never experienced anything else out of the ordinary after that. After she told that story, we all sat stunned in our seats. Mom had been holding out on me. I was thrilled but also terrified of what I'd just heard. See, at the time, I had a passive interest in the paranormal. It wasn't anything serious and nowhere near obsession levels. I wasn't out to prove that the afterlife existed, nor was I determined to find out if ghosts and spirits were real to find some sort of meaning in this chaotic world. Did I believe in the supernatural? Not really, but I'd be open to the possibility. My interest in the subject was purely recreational, like someone who enjoys horror movies or knitting sweaters. In fact, while I like urban legends and enjoy hearing ghost stories, I'm also terrified by them. My imagination, fueled by stuff I've heard and scary movies I've watched, would always get the best of me when I'm alone in the dark. It was a sort of interesting paradox. Kinda like how at one point in my childhood, I was fascinated by snakes as animals, but I was deathly afraid of encountering one out in the wild. To be honest, I was still a little bit jealous of my mom that she had such a cool story to tell. I wished at that moment I had my own story. Well, you know what they say about being careful what you wish for? Yeah. Later on in the trip, we visited my uncle, who lived a few towns over. There, he lived with his family, where he ran a very lucrative farming business. On the way there we passed a long bridge that went over a steep ravine with a river below. As our car rode along the bridge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. It made sense, since I'd traveled over this bridge many times before when I visited my uncle and cousins. However, underneath that feeling was a sense of unadulterated fear and dread. Like something bad had happened here, and it somehow directly affected me. A distant memory, screaming to be remembered. As if on cue, my dad pointed out that this bridge was infamous to the surrounding towns and cities because of the White Lady. Now, like the Capre or the Tikbalong, the White Lady is another one of the ubiquitous ghost stories told all around the country. She is perhaps the most well-known, since different countries also have their own version. In America she's usually called the Lady in White. In Spanish culture she's La Llorona. The basic idea remains the same. A ghostly-looking woman dressed in a long white dress with long dark hair stands on the side of isolated roads, waiting to hitch a ride. The scenarios vary, but in the Philippines if you stopped and gave her a ride, she would quietly enter your back seat. If you don't interact with her, she'll leave you alone until she disappears from your car some distance later. If you see her on the road and keep driving, she will suddenly appear in your car and attack you. The moral is, it's better to give her a ride than not. When we arrived at my uncle's large house, I couldn't shake the feeling that the bridge had somehow directly affected me. After a delicious dinner and a round of video games with my cousins, I found my uncle out on the balcony having a drink. He offered me a beer, since I was finally old enough, and I took a seat next to him. "Hey Tito, do you remember anything about that bridge right outside of town?" He put his drink down and regarded me for a few moments. He cut straight to the chase. "You were really young when it happened. I suppose you didn't remember it much." Now I was fully intrigued. I had to know. What exactly happened? His warm smile faded, and he told his tale. As the story went on, the memories began to flood my mind. Memories that I had long since repressed as a defense mechanism. All the details came to me in excruciating clarity, as if it happened just yesterday. By the time he had finished the story, there was no denying it. I had encountered a ghost all those years ago. It was the mid-90s, and I was still living in the Philippines. I was a plucky 6-year-old that was all about adventure and exploring. Once or twice a week, I would spend the night at my uncle's farm, back then a small budding business. The town it was in was smaller then and fairly remote. I loved that place because there were so many areas to explore, but only in the daytime. One particular night I was over at his place, just watching TV. My uncle got a call about a new delivery of chicken feed that needed to be picked up in the next town. At the time, he only had a few farmhands, and they all had the night off. Usually he wouldn't make a supply run this late at night, but he was behind schedule and needed to pick up the supplies or risk losing profit. As he headed out, he asked me if I wanted to tag along. Ever the restless child, I immediately agreed. My uncle had an old Toyota SUV that he used for all his delivery pickups. I sat in the second row, my usual spot, while my uncle slid into the driver's seat. Most of the voyage was uneventful. It was nearly 11 p.m. at night, so there were hardly any other vehicles on the road. Upon crossing the bridge the first time, nothing happened. During that time the bridge was newly constructed. It was put up the year before after the original bridge was ravaged by the last typhoon. The city even put streetlights on the new bridge for better visibility. That was a huge deal since none of the other surrounding roads had streetlights. We arrived at the next town, and I helped my uncle load up the supplies. Well, at least as much as a small 6-year-old can. On the way back home was when it happened. I was sitting in the back seat, absent-mindedly looking out the window, when I felt the car slow down. We were almost at the bridge, and I noticed that something wasn't right. I was too small to see over the seat and out the windshield, but I could tell that all the lights on the bridge were off. At this point the car slowed to a crawl. "Hey sport, why don't you lie down and take a little nap?" my uncle said from the front. Something in his voice didn't sound right. It sounded like he was scared and was struggling to hide it. "No, that's okay. I'm not tired. Please. Just do it for me, okay? He sounded stern but measured. My uncle was usually an easygoing guy, so when he got serious, you knew you should pay attention. Okay, I said as I lay down on the seat sideways. I briefly saw my uncle's eyes in the rearview mirror. They showed unmistakable fear. I felt the familiar bump that signaled that we were on the bridge, then the car stopped. Close your eyes, okay? No matter what, keep them closed. Okay. I started to get scared. I didn't know what was happening or why I had to close my eyes. Regardless, I shut them tight. Then, the strangest thing happened. My uncle started to sing. It was a traditional Filipino folk song, and I'd only heard it once before. About a year ago, my aunt and uncle got into a shouting match, as in a things were thrown across the room type of shouting match. I was at their house at the time, and my cousins and I stayed in their room, cowering and waiting for the storm to pass. An hour later, my uncle entered the room and apologized for the shouting. He then started singing that song to lull us to sleep. The melody was beautiful, and I'd never known my uncle could sing that well. He never did it again. At least not until that moment, when we were on that dark bridge. The song sounded just as beautiful, but I could tell his voice was shaking. His car wasn't that big, but I was a small child, and there was a lot of room in the second row. I was lying down on the seat perpendicular to the windows, trying and hoping for sleep to come. Instead, something else arrived. Click click. I heard the familiar mechanism of the headlights flashing. All of a sudden I sensed that I wasn't alone in that second row anymore. My spatial awareness of the car told me that there was someone or something else sitting right next to me. We had gained another passenger. I shut my eyes even tighter as my uncle began to drive. The temperature inside the car became cold. I curled myself into a ball, seeking refuge from whatever it was that was now right next to me. I didn't know much about ghosts and supernatural creatures at that age, and though I couldn't see it, something told me that I was in the presence of something not of this world. My uncle finished the song and started over again. I was amazed that he was able to keep his composure. I refused to open my eyes. I could hear her. So uncomfortably close next to me. At first, I heard what sounded like clicking. As it increased in volume, it sounded like stalks of celery being twisted and broken. Crack 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 crack. It was unnerving. Those sounds weren't normal. They were all around me. We finally crossed over the bridge, but she was still there. I was so scared I could barely move. The car hit a bump, which caused me to slide to the side. Closer to her. I felt a damp cloth against my leg. My breaths became shallow, and I started to cry. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I opened my eyes for a split second. In that split second, I saw her. A brief flash of white, with stringy damp hair on her head, blacker than night. She was turned away from me. I blinked the tears from my eyes. When I opened them again, the mass of black hair was now right in front of my face. I shut my eyes tight again. After what seemed like an eternity, the car hit a familiar curve on the road that signaled the entrance into our town. I felt that entity come even closer to me. By this time my uncle was silent. No more songs. The air became even colder right next to my face, and I shook, not from the cold but from terror. Then she spoke. Right into my ear. It was a hushed whisper, lower than any whisper I've ever heard. I couldn't make out what she said. It didn't sound threatening or angry. It sounded sad. And then she was gone. I immediately felt the difference. I could no longer feel another presence in the car, and the air went from cold to tropical humid again. I heard my uncle breathe a sigh of relief. I didn't open my eyes until we had reached the safety of the farm. My uncle had to carry me back inside and straight into my bed, and only then did I open my eyes. From what I could recall, we never spoke of that night to anyone, not even each other, ever again. Subsequent trips across the bridge at night never resulted in another white lady sighting, at least not for me. I'd find out later that in the early 80s a woman was found ended at the bottom of that bridge. People said that she was traveling to the next town and was hoping to catch a ride with any passing vehicles. It was late at night, and she had no family nearby that could give her a ride. No one knows what really happened, but many suspected that it was murder. After my trip back to the Philippines, I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the bridge. How could I forget such an incredible and terrifying experience? I guess it doesn't matter since I remember it now. But there was something else I realized about that night, something I hadn't remembered before. When I heard her whisper, I thought I only heard unintelligible garble. But that's not true. She did say something. She said, "Maraming salamat." Translated to English, that means thank you very much. I moved with my mother to a house next to a graveyard. I got a room in the cellar. There were a few things that seemed strange. 1. I was with my girlfriend in my room, and we were talking. It was around 2 to 3 a.m. Then we realized someone turned on the lights in the cellar. The washing machine is also located in the cellar, so we thought it had to be my mother, who for some reason wanted to wash clothes. We heard footsteps coming down the stairs, but that was it. No door sound for the room with the washing machine, no steps up the stairs, and the light never turned off. We decided to go to sleep. The next morning the lights were still on. I asked my mother if she was washing the clothes last night, and she said she slept safe and sound in her bed. 2. Same house. My mother went away for a weekend, so I and my girlfriend were guarding the house alone. We were watching TV upstairs in the living room. It was in the middle of the day. Then we heard that someone unlocked the door to the house and opened and closed it. The living room was just separated with a wall, and the couch was at the wall that separated those two rooms. We thought that my mother came back early, and I ran to the door to say hello. But there was no one. I opened the door and looked outside. There was no one. Later my mother told me she had once experienced exactly the same thing. 3. When we were living at that house, we also had a cat. There were a lot of times when I was in my room at the cellar, which is connected to a long hallway, and at the end there are the stairs, when she meowed in the hallway for a while and suddenly started hiding in my room. But we never realized that something happened, so it could just be a tantrum. The following is a true story. Back in the early 1990s I worked in trauma scene cleanup. If you do not know exactly what that is, we were the professionals that came in after the crime scene investigators left. We cleaned up crime scenes, unattended deaths, suicides, accidental deaths, or even some cases of attempted murders or non-death accidents, but still those were just as bloody and gruesome. As you can imagine, I have been to some pretty horrible situations. A lot of the scenes even made local and national news coverage. We were on 24-hour call service, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to get calls in the middle of the night for some events. This one evening in particular came in just after 10 p.m. or so. By the time we arrived on scene, it was after 11 p.m. This time my crew consisted of my team leader and me, the supervisor. So it was just the two of us, and we figured we didn't need a third hand, so we handled the call. The sheriff's department released the scene to us. Our job wasn't to clean up the scene but to secure the site. We would do this service too, as a lot of public agencies didn't have the ability to leave resources on site to secure the crime scenes in this way. We were used to dealing with it, and most agencies used our services. The scene was in a well-to-do neighborhood, not millionaires but people who were better than middle class. It was at the end of a cul-de-sac neighborhood, a 2-story house with a long driveway up to the house. We parked our truck at the end of the driveway and made our way to the scene. Most of the time the deputies only told us to secure the scene and sign the papers allowing us on the property, and then they were off. We get up to the house. From what I gathered, the father ended his entire family, wife and kids, then set fire to his house and ended himself in the living room. Of course when we arrive on the scene, the bodies are never still there, but what is left behind certainly is, most of the time blood, and other stuff. The coroner doesn't remove everything, but we are used to that. However, in this case, we were not there to clean up blood or anything but to secure the scene, which usually involved boarding up the structure and putting locks on doors that were broken into by the fire department. Sometimes they cut holes in the roof to vent out the fire, and sometimes they cut holes in the walls to search for hidden flames. As we enter the house, it is still very hot inside. Most people are unaware of how long it takes a building to cool after a fire, but in contrast with the crisp cool air outside, the hot humid smoke-filled air inside makes you begin to sweat a lot, and wearing dust masks doesn't help. Since many of the windows had already sustained damage, we used to board them up from the inside. We would drill screws into the plywood from the inside and board up most of the windows that way. For others, like large sliding glass doors, we would place plywood outside and reinforce it with 2x4s inside and bolt them, sandwiching the frame, so as to secure it properly. You see, the reason why it is so important to do all of this is because some sites like this become an attractive scene for kids, teens, and even some adults. Some try to break in to see what happened out of morbid curiosity, or some will break in to steal any valuables in the home. In other cases, we had to chase teens and homeless people away, so it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that we could find people who had already snuck inside. As we were inside, like I mentioned, it was hot, we were sweating, and as in all fires, the utilities are often shut off, so we had a mounted generator in our truck and would run extension cords and use battery-powered lanterns. My coworker and I were in the process of boarding up the back windows that were in the kitchen and dining room. Like I said, we only had the light from a lantern, and inside the entire house was dark and getting darker as we placed each board over an opening and shut out any moonlight that came in. As we were working on the windows of the kitchen, I felt like I saw a shadow behind me. I just thought it was my imagination and didn't say anything to my coworker. We both heard a loud thud from upstairs that made both of us jump at first. However, we both have been doing this type of work for years at this point and knew that homes that suffered a fire often make loud noises as the water mixed with the intense heat makes wood expand and pop, so we just assumed that's what it was. Not a moment later I saw my coworker turn and look behind him. He did it in a way where you would expect someone to be in a defensive position, like expecting to confront someone. He turned and looked at me, and I said something like, "I've been seeing shadows," and he looked at me with a look of concern, and he said that he had been too, and we both looked at each other like, WTF. Just then we heard more noises from upstairs. It actually sounded not like a house settling from fire but like someone was upstairs going through things. We used to carry hammer hatchets, as sometimes we would need to cut things, like using an axe, and hammer things in, so we also considered it our defensive weapon if the need should ever arise. We grab our lights and head upstairs. We are fully expecting to find some teen or burglar ransacking for valuables, and since we are not there in a security type form, we just usually tell people to leave or we will lock them inside and call the cops. Most of the time people that we've encountered seemed more afraid of us, but we were also somewhat afraid of them. We went room by room looking for the intruder and found nothing other than signs of the murder that happened upstairs. It's funny, but back then the blood stains and bloody handprints of the last moments of someone trying to escape with their lives didn't affect me as much as seeing everyday mundane things like kids' toys, or the bathroom where maybe the eldest daughter left all her makeup and hair stuff out for the last time she got ready for that day, or the food left on the table from dinner. I can't explain it, but it's almost like the most everyday things affected me because it's like their life was normal up until they were gone. Anyway, so we head back downstairs and say to each other we are letting our minds mess with us, and if you had known me back then, I didn't scare easily, as by that time I'd seen too much and been to other people's nightmares almost on a daily basis. As we are working, we both jump and look behind us because, well, we keep seeing shadows. Now some might think that it might have been cars driving by or something outside. This wasn't the case. The house was set deep back in a cul-de-sac, and when you were at the front of the house, the driveway curved down and to the right, so unless a car magically jumped over our work truck, you couldn't see anyone driving by down the street. Not to mention we are boarding up all the windows downstairs, so the shadows we were seeing were coming from, well, the area where the dad ended himself. As we were finishing up a window that was next to the garage door that led from the house to the garage, we heard very loud footsteps from above, like if someone was walking really heavily from one side of the house to the other. We both jump up and grab our hatchets and flashlights, and if you had seen us, we must have been a funny sight because we went up and acted like we saw in the movies, like I stood in the upstairs hallway while my coworker cleared a room, and then he stood in the hallway and I cleared a room. In our minds we were like action heroes, but I am sure if someone saw us, we must have looked very stupid. Our thinking was no one was going to get by us without being seen. Again we searched everywhere, under beds, in closets, heck, even in the showers, nothing and no one. Again we tell ourselves it's our minds playing tricks on us. We go back downstairs and try to finish the rest of the windows and doors. We still jump because we keep seeing shadows. Just as we were about done with the windows downstairs and bolting up a back door, we once again heard a loud bang, like if something really big and heavy fell over. It was so big that we felt like it shook the house. We once again march upstairs, this time not expecting to find anyone, but if something collapsed, we wanted to either put caution tape or try to secure it. We go upstairs and nothing, everything was the same. We couldn't explain the loud boom. The thing is the majority of the fire damage was downstairs. The upstairs did have extensive smoke damage, but what I assumed was that the dad of the house poured gasoline downstairs in the house, set the fire, and then ended himself, so the majority of the fire was where we were working and not upstairs. We decided that our job was complete. The only thing left to do was close the front door, and since the fire department used an entry tool to bust the front door open, it wouldn't lock on its own. So in cases like that, we drill in a latch like you would put on a gate and put a padlock on it. I was drilling in the latch as my coworker was putting all our tools in the truck. As he came back up to me as I was putting in the last screw, we closed the door and put the lock on, and just then, from inside, we heard and felt bang, bang, bang. Someone or something was pounding on the door from the inside. I jumped back and turned to look at my coworker. He is running down to the truck and is starting the ignition, and I am standing there frozen for a second. I see he is already pulling out of the driveway, so I start to run with the drill and keys in my hand. I am calling out to him, wait, and then I finally jump in the truck. He is hauling out of the neighborhood, and we get onto a major street heading for the freeway. I suddenly remember the back of our truck is open. I tell him, pull over, let me close the back of the truck. He says, F that, I'm not pulling over till we get back to the shop. I finally manage to make him stop. I get out and close the back of the truck and ask him to let me drive. We never went back to that site after that night. We told the story a few times to other coworkers and friends, but we would get looks like we were crazy or people downplaying it like we just let our imagination get away with us. I have always felt something was really bad in that house, and whatever it was didn't want us in there.